Well, Jennifer and I return with a special guest, but a familiar face, Katerina Nemtsova. Katerina, it's good to have you back.
Hello, Robert. Hello, Jen. It's nice to be with you here.
Well, have you joined us for the Blitz yesterday? Now we have the classical time patrols, longer time patrols. Are you excited to see how these events unfold? And do you have any students playing? That's an important question.
So first of all, I do not have any students playing. I'm kind of now focusing on school, and I do not have too many students overall. And those that I have, they're not playing. And I look forward to see some longer time control, so we can see some thought out plans and ideas. So I look forward to this.
But Katerina, I know you do a lot of work for the U.S. Chess School, and you also do special classes for our U.S. Chess Women group. And a lot of the kids that you coach there are playing. So maybe you'll recognize some names.
Yes, I do recognize some names, and I'm excited to see them because it's true. I had like 4 lessons with the teens classes. I had with the U.S. Chess School classes. So I look forward to see how they play, because you're only kind of seeing how they solve puzzles or how they respond to questions when I'm teaching them. But now you can see their actual creative ideas. So yeah, that will be a great time.
Ooh, and we've got our games just starting, guys. Round 2 underway. Can't wait to see some of these pairings, as I'm expecting a lot of Titanic matchups.
We do, and I was about to say it's too early to use Katerina's lessons. Katerina, Jennifer was telling me that the candidate moves always consider 3. It's just too early in the opening to start using that, but we are definitely going to be doing that throughout the round. So we're taking knowledge from you and from you as well, Jennifer, and hopefully from myself. So which game is any game catching our eyes, or it's too early to have a favorite just yet?
Well, I mean, I think we can just start with some of the heavy hitters, right? Like our top seeds. We've got, of course, Nicholas Cheka in the Denker event, and Annie Wang. Who is Annie Wang playing?
Okay, it's going to take a while for me to find the game. I have so many of these open.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm also trying to look, because we've got just such a wonderful array of possibilities to look at this round. The Happy Farmer seems to be playing Pink Blossom, right?
Okay, let me try to wait. Was that from earlier today? That Pink Blossom sounds familiar. So now I'm like at a loss for who I'm supposed to be viewing, and it's just so confusing. Too many people, too many games. We are spoiled for choice is the essential point. And let me try to pull that game up really quickly. I'm just following too many things.
I have to tell you that we had a big upset in round 1, Katerina. And for those of you who are just joining us, we had the Ruth Haring tournament of girls state champions. We also have the Denker tournament of state champions, which is open to both genders. And Carissa Yip, one of our top American female players, as you know, of course, Katerina, actually lost her first round. So she was the number 4 or 5 seed and did go down. But she's not going to be alone for long. There's always upsets in scholastic tournaments.
Absolutely. And I think we talked about this with Robert. I used to lose my first rounds when I was younger all the time, and it doesn't mean too much. I could still do really well in the tournament. So I think Carissa will just pick herself up and continue finishing strong.
Yeah, and I actually just pulled up the game with Annie Wang. It's because she hadn't started her game yet, and she's taking on Zefcat, who streams on Twitch. So this should be a fun game here between 2 players who are probably familiar with each other and playing the opening very quickly.
Yeah, so this is like a C3 Sicilian type thing. How did this happen? It looks like I don't even know what name this one. It's like, is it the delayed C3 Sicilian?
I was a C3 Sicilian player my whole life. It says it's called a canal attack. Never learned that, but okay. And the bishop reroutes itself to C2, and now it does just look like a C3 Sicilian where white may choose to play D4.
Yes, this is Sarah Herman, right, from Colorado. Sarah Herman, Zetcat. And you say she streams as well, Robert.
She does, yes. She does stream. And so, she's used to playing online. She has a tough opponent ahead of her, taking on Annie Wang. But, being used to the online format is probably pretty helpful. Probably she doesn't play too many classical games or longer time controls, but it is good to have the 2D view, getting control of the mouse and playing a solid opening here that I think should offer her chances for a slight edge in the next few moves. Nothing major. It's no tension has even been created, but the eventual d4 push, that's the point of playing rook d1. It would seem is to play d4 and control the center.
That's what I wanted to say. After white plays d4, it seems to be a very solid position for white. I have the pawns in the center. The bishop on c2 can be kind of attacking the king side in the future. And there are no weaknesses, no issues for white. So I think white can be very happy with this kind of solid, sound opening.
Yeah. And I would say that the pawn on c3 needs to be here if there's a knight on c6. We talk about a pawn being 3 squares for a knight and dominating the knight. But because the knight's already on d7, thanks to bishop b5 check in the opening, once we play d4 and take back with the c pawn, there's no knight d4 jumps or anything like that. The pawn on d4 will restrict the forward progress of this knight on d7. So I think that it is a very solid position, a very nice opening for white without too many risks.
So it's surprising that black is taking so much time and not playing bishop g7, which seems like a very natural move. So I think what black is considering is potentially to play c4. So after d4, it can take en passant and leave the pawn on c3.
And whenever you play c4, you have to be worried about b3 is probably what she's considering, because c4, as Katerina is saying, if you play d4, you take en passant, and now this pawn is left on c3 rather than coming to d4. But then when playing c4, what have you changed? Well, your pawn is easier to approach, so b3 puts pressure on the c4 square. So it's a very tough decision for black. It's a committal one. And Jennifer, and what do you think? Do you think that c4, or do you think she'll just play bishop g7 and continue her natural development?
I do like this idea of c4. Normally you got a knight on c6, which is really nice because when they play d4, you can take and then stick a knight on b4. So with our knight on d7, I'm sad that I can't do that. And so repressing your idea with c4, I do rather like, but of course we have to consider the ramifications then of the move b3.
Right. And it seems like, well, Annie is still sitting here and thinking, and okay, she's plenty of time. It's not like she's getting herself into time trouble. Still have over an hour on the clock, but it is good for the lower rated player typically to be ahead early on and say, well, maybe my opponent doesn't feel so comfortable in this opening, so I can just play my stuff.
And it looks like c4 happened in the game.
So you predicted it, Katerina. You were saying, oh, she's thinking, so it looks like she might go for c4. To my eyes, b3 feels very natural and a way just to chisel up the pawn structure. It can create a weakness that black has to deal with. And as a c3 Sicilian player myself, b3 comes very naturally. As I've already delayed your d-pawn push, you can delay it even a little more. And
another idea can be to play a4 to attack the pawn chain from that side and to play knight a3 afterwards to really put pressure on the b5 square or the b5 pawn.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you could choose your move order to some extent with b3 first or a4 first, but you're making very good points that with this pawn chain from a6 to c4, white is able to quickly attack it, and that can spell trouble for black, especially with the king still in the center.
All right, so I'm starting to pick up some of these games. We've got Jennifer Yu playing against Kat Nise Verdinal, and I think we actually saw her game a little bit last round as well, and that is Zoe Tang. So we saw her. So this is already a pretty good matchup between 2100 and our reigning U.S. Women's Champion.
Okay, let me pull that one up as I have 5 million games open at the same time, so I'll close some of them so we can find that.
Yeah, what I'm doing is I'm trying to, not that we won't look at all the games eventually, but try, if you close the ones that you're not as interested in, you can have as many as possible on the screen.
For sure. And it's just these are big tournaments. Kudos to a U.S. Chess for organizing this and making sure that all these state champions could take part. It just means that there's quite a handful of games to sift through and to find the ones that we are looking at. So I'm going to pull up the game between Jennifer Yu now as soon as I find it in this list of too many. I'm just closing out of so many games. You can probably hear me clicking. Okay, close out of 1 million games. So now I will pull it up. Okay. And found it. Woo! Okay, have the position. So, Jennifer, you picked a game. You take the wheel. What's going on here?
Well, Jennifer has her nice solid position here with that, C3, D4, E3 pawn structure. I would tend to like white here, but nothing more than a better than average opening advantage, perhaps. And the reason I say that is because I'm not crazy about any of your minor pieces here as black. Your knight on A6, not much more to say. That's not a pretty piece. Bishop on G7, normally it's powerful, but we have this expression bright biting on granite because both the C3 and the E3 pawns are protecting it. So it's just like a rock wall. Even if you hit it once, you got to hit it again. And even the bishop on C8, I can't find a friendly square for the bishop as well. So for me, it's not that white is an overwhelming advantage, but it's very unpleasant to play for black.
I would concur with that. Katerina, do you agree with that sentiment?
I do agree with this idea with the pieces not being in the perfect spaces, but I also think that if black gets enough time, then black can play E5 and C5 and really destroy the center and then be super happy about the bishop on G7. So if white plays something slow, like for example, rook B1, I think black could respond with E5 and then C5 and attack the center. But I thought that maybe white wants to play bishop A3 and stop the E5. And then, yeah, I think white is having some kind of slight advantage.
Yeah, she played E4, so she can meet E5 with a D5 eventually. And another thing that I want to point out is this pawn on A5 stands out to me. That seems a little strange. And the reason why is by pushing your pawns, you create more vulnerable squares. The pawn on A7 would have covered the B6 square. And this is a bit of a deeper conceptual point. But these pawns don't go backwards. And so when I do eventually play rook to B1, I have a lot more fun on the B file in the form of the B6 square. And if I play D5 and you end up taking me on D5, or if you play C5, I just have control of these important squares along the B line. So I do think that that's something that can backfire for black. And the knight on A6 in general isn't exactly a happy piece.
By the way, I should point out, Jen, you not only are reigning U.S. Women's Champion, but she's also won this very tournament many times. Tied for first prior, won clear first the first year that Richard and Barbara Schifrin sponsored it for a $5,000 first prize, which is actually going to be increased to $10,000 when these tournaments go over the board, guys. So wow. It's really great for scholarship money for the kids, so that they're able to release that burden of college just a little bit. And it's not, so it's really nice to see her playing. She is going to Harvard in the fall. And she is not only a great chess player, but a great student and is really adamant about giving back as well. So hard not to root for Jennifer. It's easy for me to say that, right?
I was about to say that coming from you, that sounded, makes a lot of sense. It sounds like a smart thing. Rooting for Jennifer. I think you've been using that one your whole life.
And another favorite in the championship, the girls' state championship, and then maybe we can move over to the Denker games. By the way, I saw somebody in the chat ask about the Barber tournament. The Barber tournament is not taking place this weekend. Otherwise, our boards would really explode with too many amazing games. So that one, and if we take a look at our schedule, you get that reminder here. The Barber and the Rockefeller are going to be next week. And there's a lineup, guys. We had the Sunil Weeramantra Blitz Championship yesterday. Next weekend, we've got the Barber and the Rockefeller, as well as the conclusion of the seniors.
A lot of chess to be played, so many concurrent events. It's so much fun for all of us and hopefully for the viewers as well. And well, speaking of so much chess, we're looking at this position. We do like the start of it for Jennifer Yu, but there's a lot of game left. So is there another game that we would like to jet on over to and see what's going on there?
Yeah. I want to take a look at the game Cruncha Confused, number 3. I think it looks like a very interesting position.
Okay, I'm gonna need that name again because I closed so many of the games. What was the username?
Cruncha with K against Confused 3.
Okay, I'm just gonna do confused 3. That sounds much easier for me to handle. Wait, still not finding that one.
We could maybe come back to that one when we find it and take a look at the absolute favorite in the event, speed skater Cheka against
Okay.
Mathor Denker. Hey, that's a good name for this tournament.
It is for sure. And okay, we have knight coming to f6 after knight came to e4. Box, who participated in PogChamps, calls knights like this the stunt doubles, which I think is a great name for them because I never heard of knights, names for knights when they're protecting each other. But Box called these the stunt doubles, and once this knight maybe takes on c3, perhaps the next knight replaces on e4. But so far, white has everything under control. The c3 square is protected. The e4 square is under attack. So I think that Nico Cheka, speed skater, can skate his king on over to the king side and then try to open up the center after that.
Stunt double. I absolutely love that. But that's like a positive and a negative. It's good that you have a replacement, but when you have both of them, as Dovoretsky called it, the superfluous knight, then what are they doing? They're just sitting there, waiting for their moment in the sun.
Well, it depends if you ask Leonardo DiCaprio or Brad Pitt. It's a very interesting question, one that they would like to duke it out for, but it's true. Sometimes they are superfluous, Other times they can do the other's job and just replace it there in the center in this case. So I like white after castling. It feels like you're fully developed. Black is lagging a bit behind here, and in the future, this knight on f3 can come to e5, not to mention the threats on the knight on e4. I think that the opening has gone well for Nico Cheka.
Yeah, I totally agree with the castle and white being super okay here. But talking about the stun doubles, when I was younger, my coach told me not to double knights, that you are exactly taking the power of the second one who is only playing a supportive role. So to make sure that each knight has its own kind of role in the game. So it's very surprising to see how everybody approaches the knights being kind of connected.
Yeah, and it's already under attack because now that the king is castled, knight takes e4 was not possible a move ago. Now it certainly is, and that's netting white a pawn. So you either have to protect the knight on e4 another time with a queen e7 type of move, or a bishop out to f5, something of that sort, or you need to take on c3. But taking on c3 allows b takes c3. Now the bishop on b4 is under attack, and look at how nicely white's pieces are developed here, and black only has a knight and a bishop out and has yet to castle.
Queen e7 seems like a very good move to just make sure we put more support on the knight on e4.
I agree. That way you don't have to commit to anything. You can reinforce this knight on e4 with another piece. And I think that it's a reasonable reply here. And then white has several options. You can play a3 just to try to force the action over on the c3 square, or maybe play for a pawn minority attack, Carlsbad structure. That's what we look at here, where black has 4 pawns. And let's cut the d file off. So 3 pawns versus 2 pawns. And white is often the one trying to break open this side of the board with a3, b4, and b5. So I think that's one of the thematic ideas in this type of structure here.
Meanwhile, let's head over to another former champion of the National Girls Tournament of Champions, and that is the young Rochelle Wu, who is got this kind of nice positional advantage already against Panda Pai Pai.
Okay, let me pull up that.
That's Tanky 97 is Rochelle's handle.
Okay, that makes it easy. And here we go. I have that game open now. And Panda Pai Pai. First, that's creative because pie is both sort of like the very delectable dessert that now I'm craving, and also the math term pie. So that's cool to see. Creative name.
But how many digits can you remember?
3.14, and that's really as far as I'm getting. I don't know, 15 something.
9. I think I have 1 digit more than you, Robert.
it just never felt useful in any way, shape, or form to remember that, and so I did. I know people who went on the radio and did those competitions, like who could do the most digits of pi. It just felt like I would be filling my memory bank with useless information that I could always go and Google. The internet has made me lazy, I admit
Yeah, that's true. The pie is like one of these things where I guess it's much more important to understand, and this pertains to chess too. It's much more important to understand like the concepts behind it and the origins of it than to memorize long lists of digits, right?
How about you, Katerina? How many digits of pi do you know?
No, I know only 3 point, exactly as you, 1 4. That's all I think is necessary.
Okay,
I also
but
think that it's important to kind of learn how to use information instead of just like remember stuff.
well, let's stop talking about pie and start talking about pie. What is your favorite flavor of pie?
Mm.
Pecan pie.
Okay.
Pecan? Pecan?
Pecan, yes.
Yeah. Wow.
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
that's a good choice. What about you, Jennifer?
I like cherry.
I'm an apple pie guy.
All right.
Well, now here's the real question, the
Very
controversial
simple.
question: pumpkin pie, yes or no?
Yes. Yes. I make a great pumpkin pie. And the thing about pumpkin pie is people who don't like dessert, they still like pumpkin pie because it's got that savory vibe to it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to skip on the pumpkin pie, but I feel like kids don't like it as much, right? Because kids want something more like a big sweet taste in their mouth, not this like more subtle spicy flavor sometimes. But
Katerina,
yeah,
what about you? Pumpkin pie, yes or no?
I mean, yes, but I don't like pies too much. So I'm more like an ice cream person.
I'm a both. You can be both, right? I have ice cream on my pie, and I also do like pumpkin pie, Jennifer. So big fan. I think it's delicious.
Okay, I have a question about this position. So black plays e5. If I move the knight to b5,
uh-huh.
like I'm threatening knight c7, knight d6, rook d5, bishop d5. I mean, there is a lot of possibility with the light squares being weak. So I wonder, what would you play if I play knight b5?
Knight b5 looks like a very dangerous move. Do note though, Katerina, if you play knight b5, knight c7, I do have the nice little in-between saveru of knight d4 with the idea that if pawn d4, queen c7, and maybe I'm hanging on, I'm certainly not losing all my pieces. So I'm kind of happy about that.
Right.
Considering I'm clearly worse in this position. I mean, why do we say like black's clearly worse? Because like look at that hole on b5 and the light squares and the hole on g6. It just really seems like, speaking of food, it seems like Swiss cheese. There's just too many holes in the position. And I was very attracted to the move knight b5 as well, but I think that's probably why Rochelle chose knight b3, because she realized that knight b5 there's actually no threat. You can't play knight c7 right away because of knight d4. So she chose this other very subtle move, attacking the queen on c5. But Robert, you tend to not like the knights on those how do I say it, b3 or g3 squares.
I almost always hate knights in those squares because they tend to stay there too long, and they become a potential punching bag if black gets a4 in and things of that sort. I will note that it does gain a very important tempo because knight to b5, there actually may have been bishop e6, and after knight c7, there's both Jen's idea with knight to d4, but also bishop to c4, saving the bishop by attacking the white queen and then moving the rook away from c8. So I'm not positive that black's out of the woods. I actually don't think that she would have been, but it does make it more understandable why she went for knight b3 immediately, using Katerina's idea of taking advantage of all of these weak squares, d6, d5, trying to get this bishop out to d5. And so black has to first move the queen and then figure out how to salvage all of these compromised squares. And it's not just those. The g6 square is another one that in the long run is going to be a problem. So I think the advantage will still exist and maybe even grow now. And look at her. She puts her queen on b5, another weak square.
Yeah, I love that. And that's why you always have to be careful when you make a move like a5, because this outpost square on b5 is not only fun for the knight. Other pieces like it as well. And here the queen is saying a big hello, and it's really nice for white that there's just no good way to attack that queen. Knight a7 hangs the a pawn, and so it's there to stay.
Maybe the a4 move, though, for black. That said the knights on b3, g3, I'm not a big fan of them. And, well, why not just boot that knight out and try to get rook a5 in? The problem with putting your pawn to a4 is it's on a square that is more vulnerable and can be attacked right away. So I do think that black needs to do something active, play a little sharper here, because positionally, positionally, it's already a struggle here because of all of these compromised squares that white is just looking to jump into.
Now, there are tactics in the position if I want to play really concretely as white. Like sometimes I can play like bishop c6 and queen c5, that kind of stuff. But I don't want to give the bishop on g2 away. It's only if I really feel like I'm going to be able to win a pawn and transition into an endgame. And so, for instance, now that the move bishop g4 was played, our rook on d1 is in capture. We do have the in-between move queen c4 check if we want it, though. We could even transpose into an endgame, guys, with queen c4 check, bishop e6, queen takes e6. I don't know if I'd want to do that, though, right? I'd probably be more inclined to keep more pieces on the board with bishop d5. What do you guys think?
I like the idea of just moving the rook d2, and seeing what black is going to do, because the white's pieces are perfect. The queen on b5, the bishop on g2, and you can, for example, play rook d8, because then I can take, and either b7 is hanging or pawn on a6 is hanging. So now you need to decide what you want to do. And my next idea is to play just knight c5, knight c5, and just improve my pieces, or rook e1. And white, I mean, black needs to decide what to do here. And I think it's not that simple, because the knight on c6 cannot go anywhere. Too many light, weak squares. Maybe f5 or.
And she did play your move, and I love the patience there, Katerina, because you're right. Knight c5 is a gorgeous looking move, because it's not only going to then queen c4 is really going to be a devastating threat, because you'll no longer have bishop e6. So you'll be compelled to stop that threat. But hey, the b7 pawn is also hanging. So there are just threats galore. I just don't even know what to do with black here.
Yeah, actually, I really like this idea with queen c4 in the back of our minds. The knight at c5 stops the bishop from retreating to e6. So this looks like a really tough position for black. I would even consider the move king to like h8 or king h7, just to avoid these sort of queen c4 checks. But if you're making the move king somewhere in a position like this, where white already has such good control over the board, you know that white has to have the advantage here. And even a move like h3 and then trying to bring this other rook to d1, if we imagine pieces coming off the board, you think about what trades you want to see happen. There's an advantage on the queen. King h8 was played, by the way. There's an advantage on the queen side for white with 3 pawns against 2. And typically in endgames, that is something that really allows you to push for a win without too much risk.
One question that kind of white needs to answer now: is it good to capture the knight on c6 and win a pawn? And sometimes people like to transpose kind of their advantage immediately into some material advantage. But this bishop on g2 was just so amazing. And I think it's not worth it to get the pawn for losing that bishop.
I certainly agree. I mean, it makes your light squares on the king side very weak. The bishop on g4 suddenly becomes the strongest piece on the board. And so black will quickly have counterplay with queen f7, queen h5 as well. I would not risk this. Certainly not. It doesn't seem worth it at all. So it's good to keep that idea in mind. And both of you two had mentioned bishop takes c6, just because you win a pawn. But greed, Yasser, Sarawan, I hope you're listening. Greed is not always good. Don't listen to Gordon Gekko at all times. Pawn grabbing can come back to haunt you. And
okay, h3 played.
h3 looks like a good idea, trying to force the bishop away so we can play rook ad1. So I do understand that idea, but I still think that rook ae1 was another option to simply kind of develop the last piece that is not doing anything.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. And this pawn h3 makes moves like bishop takes c6 even more difficult to foresee, because then the h3 pawn can be a target. Say if this bishop retreats somewhere like f5 or even bishop c8. I don't like bishop c8 because now I'm undeveloping my piece. This position does not look fun for Panda Pi Pi.
No, really nice demonstration right now. Positional demonstration by Rochelle so far in this game. I think she's quite young. I don't want to get her age wrong, but she's not in high school yet. I don't think. I think she's like a 7th or 8th grader, and she is just incredibly talented. She won this tournament several years ago, actually. So when she was one of the younger players in the entire event. I think she's 13 or 14 right now.
That's correct. It does feel like she's like a veteran at this point because she's played in so many events and she's competed against many of the strongest players in the country. But then you remember she's still barely a teenager and she has a lot of progress remaining in her chess career, which is great because she'll hopefully join the ranks of Annie and Jennifer and Carissa, and not just them, but anyone in their teenage years. And hopefully she strives for even greater heights. Why not? No, there's no limit here. And I think that she has some role models that she can immediately look at and say, hey, they're accomplishing big things, but why don't I keep on going and try to actually outpace their progress? It would be cool to see.
I played with Rochelle at the World Team Championship in Kazakhstan because she qualified to play for the US team and she was celebrating her birthday there and she was 13, I believe, there. And it was just like everybody was looking and she won against some really strong opponents. So a lot of players were looking and surprised how strong and how young our US team was.
Oh yeah, because you had Carissa there that year. So it was Carissa, Rochelle, you, and Tatev, I believe.
Tatev on the first board, and me, then Jennifer, Rochelle, and Sabina Foysor.
And Katarina's too modest, but she played one extremely excellent game that back when I was writing the article for Chess Life in my column, Katarina's game was the game of the month because it was so well played.
Yeah, it was a nice game.
So you can't even say it out loud, really. I know how modest you are, but it was a really exceptional game.
Oh, I'm gonna have to go look that one up, Katarina. Speaking of Katarina and our game, she recently gave a lesson just 2 days ago, actually, to our women's group. And we just put it on YouTube. It was about forcing moves. I'm going to drop it in the chat if you want to check it out. And, solve some tough puzzles in between rounds here.
I do agree. Forcing moves are so important. And I was so happy to record that lesson. And I think chess players who consider candidate moves and forcing moves can really find beautiful variations and strong continuation. So check out that video and I hope it's going to help you.
Jen, I saw what just happened there. I made you a VIP for real now. I think I put Jennifer Shahade, so I'll have to un-VIP whoever Jennifer Shahade is.
Oh yeah, that's not me. That's not me. I do like Jennifer though. I love the name. And actually, Jennifer Yu and I have the same opinion. She's pretty chill. We're both okay with Jen, but we also both like Jennifer because it's such a pretty name.
I also like the name Jen. I always call you Jennifer. Sometimes I'll throw in a Jen here and there, but whatever your preference is, I'll continue to call you that. And speaking of preferences, I know Katarina mentioned this game with Confused 3. I found the game. There's an underscore there that I kept not putting in. So I was like typing in Confused 3 and not getting it because I was confused. But speaking of confused and this position, double rooks in the F file, barreling down here. I'm looking at rook takes F6. When I am not playing, I sacrifice other people's pieces all the time. And rook takes F6 is clearly the first move that I'm considering here. Katarina, Jennifer, should we play rook takes F6 or should I kind of slow my roll a bit?
I think it's definitely a move we want to consider because we are removing a really strong piece near to the king. We are weakening the control of the d5 square that our knight can jump to. The h6 pawn is going to be weak. As a commentator, I would take the knight. As a player, I would probably need more calculation.
I think it's a good way to look at it. What are you, Jennifer? Are you intuition? Is rook takes F6 the move that
Let's
you think?
Let's do it. Yes. I want to do it right now because I'm afraid if I don't do it now, I won't get to do it later.
Oh my gosh, it's just
That's
so tempting.
my intuition. Yeah, I'm too tempted.
Well, I think the one potential downside of taking on F6 is like rook F6, G takes F6, and we take back on F6 with a rook. Then it looks like perhaps this knight just goes back to G8. And even though the position at first glance looks really strong for white, we just stole an important pawn in front of the king. We have given up one rook for just a bishop. I mean, there's a bishop on D3 and one pawn. But white's pawn structure, not exactly that great. And maybe this rook will come up to E6 next to help in the defense and maybe even get into offense by swinging over to G6. So we are giving black some much needed breathing room and activity, in which case we really have to start calculating deeply, is it worth it? And that's the essential question here.
Yeah, great points. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing whether that happens. Yeah, that knight on G8 ends up being a really nice defensive move, doesn't it?
I would like to activate the bishop before we take on F6. Is that a possibility? What do you think?
So activate the bishop. Where's that? How are we going to do that? The A4?
Bishop A2, bishop G4 would be perfect to kind of trade it for the knight. But then we need to probably play A3 first. And that looks suspicious.
You'd have to play A3 first so that you can avoid the move B4, winning the E4 pawn.
Right. And
are we in any rush? Is Black going to play D5? Because D5 opens the bishop immediately, which I am very happy as white.
So D5, yeah, that's a move that you'd consider, but as you're saying, the bishop on D3 is much stronger in the case of D5. So A3 looks like a reasonable move just to stop any kind of B4. I'm into that. Rook takes F6, we discussed. We'll have to look in more detail at that move because it is so tempting. It does give Black some counter chances, so we'll table that. A4 to open up the bishop towards the queen side, always a consideration. So we'll let the audience ponder that because time for a brief break. When we return, we'll continue covering the second round of the Denker and the Haring Tournament of State Champions. We'll be right back. And we return here with more coverage of the Denker and Haring. And also the senior championship is going on, this tournament of state champions, but we're focusing on the scholastic events for now. Jennifer, Katarina, any games catch your eye during our break here? Because there are so many to choose from.
Well, we did get a request in the chat, and I thought it was a good suggestion to take a look at Praveen's game because he is a incredible player, previous Denker champion, Virginia representative. And yeah, I think he's number 2 seed. So let's pop in on him. He's right now Praveen B 2002 is his name on chess.com.
I happen to have his game open as we return, so it seems like there's some telepathy going on here. I didn't even see that request, but here we are in Praveen's game, where he has the black pieces. His pawn structure includes a set of double pawns on the B file, but his rooks are happier than White's rooks, the rooks in C and D8. So it's kind of a mixed bag here. Katarina and Jennifer, Katarina, you first. Whose position would you rather have and why?
I like the bishop on g5, the black bishop that's controlling dark squares, compared to the white dark square bishop, which is not particularly well placed. I do like, on the other hand, for the white, I do like the pawn in the center, pawn on d4, the knight on e5. The question is if the position only looks good or if it's actually the pieces cooperate well. And I think that white can do some harm when white goes, for example, knight b4, knight d3, knight c5. So I think I would prefer white here.
Okay, Jennifer, what about you?
I guess I'll differ and say that I'll take black because I do like the activity. These types of end games where you have some structural deficiencies, but you get a lot of dynamism. I'm always going to go for that dynamic side. How about you, Robert? Break the tie.
I am going to say that the position has promise for both sides, but I would take black here. And I just like the looks of the rooks and the bishop on g5. It feels like for now, black is coordinated much better. I do completely agree with Katarina that as the game continues, if you can stop any of black's threats, then white's pawn structure, particularly pawn on d4, will be good. But I think a5, just to both stop Katarina's plan with knight b4 to d3, and potentially play b4 myself at some moment to undermine the defense of the d4 pawn. That's where my attention is drawn. Although I have to admit, I don't see like a very direct follow-up. It's more just the feel of the position and liking the coordination of black's pieces.
I was wondering, what if white goes, I know it's black's turn now, but then white, it goes rook f1 and tries to push for f4.
That's reasonable. Extremely reasonable, in fact. And you're pushing my bishop back. And I'm not happy about that. So.
And you can't really stop me with bishop f4 because then I jump knight d3 and play my f4 anyway. But it's black's turn, so maybe there is something to do against that.
I'm still looking at, well, maybe I can bring my knight to d5 to help out on the f4 square. So that's something that black can consider in many of these variations. Is if you do play rook f1, you kind of telegraphed your plan, and I'll stop it by bringing my piece into a more advanced position.
Yes, I like that. Knight d5 is definitely a good move, taking control of f4.
Although you can continue with moves like f3 and bishop g3. It's a little slow, perhaps, but it does develop your bishop. That was the first piece that you were critical of, saying this bishop on e1 isn't really doing much of anything. So if you can either play bishop g3 or even bishop to h4 to offer an exchange of bishops because the bishop on g5 is so strong, I feel like that's a valid option here for white.
I like that idea indeed. Yeah, look at your opponent's best piece, try to remove them. And right here, the knight on e4 and the bishop on g5 have a really nice thing going on, don't they? They're coordinating quite well. You want to guys pop in on another game? I'm currently looking at the young Alice Lee. Of course, everybody in these tournaments is young, but Alice Lee is 11 years old or 10 years old, and she is one of the top seeds in the girls tournament of champions. She's Power of a Point is her name on chess.com. And right now she's got a powerful center, but her opponent is trying to make use of some of these dark squares and sink a knight into f4. What do you guys think?
Katerina, I'll let you take this one first because I need to spend some time thinking here. So you're up.
So I remember we were looking at Alice Lee playing the Blitz tournament yesterday, and she scored a really nice win in the last round, I think winning with the Grandmaster, I believe. So she's definitely a very strong player. I said that she attends a lot of lessons and she's very active. And I do like her position here, having e4 and d4 in the center, having rooks, everything is developed, everything looks well. So now is the time to kind of figure out what to actually do in the position. And sometimes when all your pieces stay well, your next kind of idea should be to change the pawn structure. So when I think about changing the pawn structure, I think about playing d5 or maybe playing g3 to just get a little bit more space. But when I'm looking at these moves, I don't particularly like either of them. So I'm not really sure. Maybe black is just fine because his pieces are also active, especially the knights and the queen. The pawn on e6, I think, is very weak, and black should get some disadvantage for the pawn. But I don't see particular way how to have an advantage here for white. Actually, maybe play e5 and knight e4. That's also changing the pawn structure and improving the knight from c3.
And by the way, her opponent is Gari Manan from Wisconsin. And she also, I believe, is a frequent attendee of the US Chess School. Shout out to my brother, Greg Shahadi, who does run that. And she was actually also recently at one of my seminars where we had Jen Yu and some other incredible incoming college freshmen talk about the college application process. So Gari is really cool. She's into math, she's into chess, and I was really impressed. She's a very mature and interesting young person. This is just a battle between two very bright stars in American chess. Alice Lee, I just checked while you were talking. She's actually only 10 years old. I mean, amazing.
Wow.
That's incredible.
And I do want to point out that the rating here for black seems to be 1390. Her rating is like 2000. So it just
Yeah.
doesn't frequently play on chess.com. And this time control, the ratings will not match up to their US chess strength. And so it's not like this could be an 800-point upset. It would be more like a 200-point rating gap between these two players. And Katerina, it seems like Alice has learned from your lessons because she played the move e5, which you've just been talking about. And the big problem, I'm putting that in quotation marks, is that you've given up control over d5 and f5 if this knight ever goes back to e7. But of course, you've gained some space, and your knight can come into e4 and into d6 itself. So that's something that is clearly beneficial. The pawn on e6 is cemented on a square that can be attacked later in the game. And one thing I'm learning about you, Katerina, as we have done this analysis, is you like these central pawns. The first thing you were talking about was how white had these two pawns in the center here. And Jennifer, on the other hand, you were saying, you like the dynamic play and sort of the flair here with the knights coming into f4. Knight h5 to f4 is the move that I would play here. And I kind of, when I'm commentating, I definitely have this like, I want to be super active. And then when I'm playing, I kind of have this more of this like balanced positional approach. So I think commentary brings out that inner tactician in me that I wish I unleashed more in my over the board games.
Yeah, maybe that's because commentary, like you're looking for the tactics for like explosive ideas to show the audience, whereas you have a more balanced approach in your actual playing games.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's helpful to be just balanced, because if you play too much tactics, you lose unnecessarily because you just miscalculate. So being just very kind of solid and just keeping your small advantage and then slowly increasing it, sometimes that's the way to go as well.
Yeah, because many games are decided, especially at this level, by some kind of forcing decision that backfires. Then as you continue climbing and as these players will continue to improve, games are decided not just by, oh, this person blundered a pawn or blundered a knight or anything like that. It's like, well, this decision was inaccurate for this reason that was 3 moves down the line because it created a weak square. And one of the first things I mentioned here is that the move e5 gives control of the d6 square eventually for this knight coming into e4, or maybe even a queen trade with queen e4. But it also gives up the d5 and the f5 squares. So it's a really big decision that was made by Alice. And I think that she's fully capable of making big decisions despite her age belies her strength. She's really, really good. And I think that nobody's underestimating her It's just that with her being so young, she doesn't have experience in the variety. She doesn't have the breadth of positions that somebody who's played much more chess would have. So that's just something I wanted to note.
Oh yeah, and by the way, Katerina gave a lesson to one of our girls' teen group that was based on positional play, and it's really funny to me how kids who are like in the 1800 to 2100 range, like the discrepancy between their tactical ability and their strategic ability, eventually they converge, but it's amusing because they just see so much, but positionally sometimes things just are a blind spot for them. Like they've never heard of a concept before. And I love to see that because in a way it shows how much potential you have if you're really improving rapidly and have a high rating, but there's a bunch of stuff you don't know because it means your learning curve is just going to shoot right up.
For sure.
Yeah. The thing is that practicing tactics, I think it's very simple. Like you can do on chess.com, it has like database of millions of puzzles and positions, and you just, practice it twice a week, 2 hours or 3 times a week. But positional chess is really hard to practice on your own because you really need somebody to help you to understand it, or you really need to go and open a book, which I'm not sure how many youngsters actually still use books.
I think more than you'd think, actually. I've interviewed a lot of them, and it seems like the strong ones, at least, often do sometimes read books. But not a lot. Like, I'm not saying they're on reading like books as often as they're online doing puzzles, but many of them do enjoy that, and I'm glad because honestly, looking especially now in this time where a lot of events have been canceled, I don't think it's great for anyone to be looking at a screen 12 hours a day. So maybe 8, and then the other 4 you can read Jacob Agar's or Dvoretsky's book for a highly balanced life.
Well, I will add about tactics, and something I say very often is that doing puzzles helps build up this muscle memory, just tactical, just knowing this tactic exists. But at a certain point, you then get into this situation where in a game, nobody's tapping you on the shoulder being like, Jennifer, Katerina, there's a tactic here. So when you do puzzles online, there's a solution. Whereas in a game, you don't even have that knowledge. So you miss things because you didn't know that they were there. And so that's why I think as players do get stronger, puzzles are so useful, of course, keeping them sharp. But that's why when I work with students, I don't give them puzzles, I give them positions. Sometimes the position is completely even, and I just want them to tell me, this position is equal. It looks level, and they tell me why. So talking descriptive terms is helpful in those cases. And I stick to that pretty firmly because, like I said, there's nobody helping you during a game of chess except yourself. So you have to come up with the fact that there's a tactic. Nobody's pointing out that it exists.
Robert, I absolutely agree with you. One thing that I would add is that what I tell sometimes my students, because they tell me I practice tactics a lot, but then I don't get to actually use it in my chess games. And I think it's important to also recognize that tactics do not happen out of nowhere if you are already an advanced player, but you have to play sound, good positional moves, and then you get a good position, and then you need to strike with the tactics. But you need kind of first to find good developing and improving moves.
Totally.
Yeah, very well put. Guys, our defending champion, Martha Samadashvili, has a very interesting game going on right now against Caris 20. If you want to check that out, this one looks like it's going to be a super fun one. And by the way, her opponent's full name is Carissa Zhang, and she is playing for Maryland. But I like this game. It looks like it's going to be so much fun. Carissa is coming for Martha on the king side, and meanwhile, Martha is trying to invade on the queen side. Who do you guys like?
I think there are too many pieces on the board. That's my first.
No trade.
Not even a
pawn.
No, nothing's been traded. And you point out the pawn on b2 is hanging. And typically, when one side's attacking on the king side, you're pretty frightened. But I don't actually see how the attack builds up here for white, whereas black already has a direct threat from the pawn on b2, and c5 to c4 is another option that can be played next. And I just feel like black is first to the punch here. Katerina, would you agree with that, or do you think that white has a more potential for the attack than I'm giving credit?
I'm looking for some ideas like knight f6, pawn takes f6, and knight take h7, just to really clear that king side and then jump there with queen h5. The problem is that then I end up there with the beautiful queen, but no other pieces around. Just the bishop not really doing anything. So I do think there is some potential on the king side, but I do have to be careful what the knight and the bishop on the queen side is doing. So I think move like rook b1 can still keep my options open and see what black is going to do, because it's hard to kind of progress on the queen side. If you play c4 as a white, then I just block it with d4, and then there's not much to do. And if you play d4 as black, then you are giving up e4, which is really important square for the bishop, for the knight, and that's going to bring other issues.
That's a great idea. I agree. Rook b1, just defend the pawn. You attacked it, and the position is so close that it's not that easy for black to figure out what to do next. I really would love to arrange the move c4, but at the moment, as you say, d4 looks like a good response. So maybe we could try to prep it with something like, you know, queen to b6, looking to play c4 and disallowing d4.
The problem with queen b6 is not that it's going to be a bad move necessarily, but it's dragging a piece away from your king side.
Yeah.
And that just concerns me as looking, how do I keep my king safe? Now, I will say that I really like the placement of this knight in f5. It feels very useful because if you ever play h6, for example, if there's a good move to kick the knight from g5, there's no knight sacrifice on h6 thanks to this knight on f5. So I'm trying to figure out the right way for black to both, you know, poke and prod on the queen side while defending the king and maybe even kicking some of the enemy pieces away. It's a really difficult situation. That's why Martha's down 15 minutes on the clock, because typically you're a little more concerned about your king than you are about a pawn being under attack on the other side of the board.
Yeah, priorities. But that's why it looks like black has gotten a bit of a head start, already pushing the pawn to b4, but you really need a head start in these types of situations. And whoa, the move c4 just played. I was not expecting that, you guys, but it does have a point. I can't just play en passant because you have queen takes a4, hitting my bishop on a6. And I haven't looked at it too closely, but it looks like if you take on b2, queen b3 does trap the knight. What an ingenious try to avoid knight takes b2. I did not see this coming.
I was looking at c4 as an option, but I'm actually worried that after queen b3, I can take pawn takes c4. You take the knight, and I take the pawn on d3, and wow, these pawns b4, c5, d3. I mean, that's going to be very dangerous with the rook on c8 supporting the pawns, the bishop on a6.
Oh, this is a
little worried as white.
This is a fun one. We gotta wait and see what black does here, because you're totally right, Katerina, that knight takes b2. I was looking at trying to do something similar with en passant, but it's not as good because when I play en passant, queen a4 takes on b2, rook b1, you're attacking my bishop on a6 and my pawn on b2. So I think I like your method better.
It's a very interesting position where, you know, it seems like white has said, okay, you know what? I think this minor piece is more important. And at this point, black does have a choice. She doesn't have to take on b2 or take on c4. Both of those are really interesting. She can play a move like queen to d7 or maybe even knight to b6 if she wants to not give up the piece. But I think that giving up the piece is fascinating. You just were both talking about this knight b2 and then giving up the knight on the square and start chopping pawns down. And 3 pawns for a knight, when they're those kind of pass pawns, it looks worth it. The issue that I'm seeing, and it's a deeper issue, is that the e4 square is cleared. And Katerina made a good point earlier that the light square bishop would love to go to e4. So just to show that position, knight b2, queen b3, take on c4, take on b2, c takes d3 here. Maybe there's some kind of bishop e4 with potential. It doesn't look that dangerous just yet, but I'm just noting that the d5 pawn is no longer there, so bishop e4 is an opportunity for white to bring another piece towards the enemy king.
Yeah, this one's going to be fun, guys. And one of the things here is that I think I'm predicting a long thing here by Martha. Even though she only has 36 minutes left on the clock compared to her opponent's 53, I would be surprised if you made a move in the next 2 minutes or 2 or 3 minutes, because this possibility of knight b2 is just so rich. In fact, it's possible we'll see her tank here for 5 minutes or more. So maybe it's a fascinating game, but maybe we should move on and then come back to it. But really keep an eye on it to see if she goes for this knight takes b2 idea, because it is such a cool idea.
I think we should, and I think that actually Martha would be well advised to spend some serious time here, because this is changing the entire trajectory of the game. So we'll come back here. One game in the top one of the Denker with Nico Cheka, that one has changed a lot since we saw it earlier. So I want to bring us to that one, if that's okay. As we're at this position earlier, where I was talking about, oh, like maybe there'll be a pawn minority attack by pushing against the Carlsbad structure. But let's go through what's actually happened, because we seen a position, if we get to the live board, with many trades here. And this was a critical moment where white took on e4, saying if you take with a pawn, I throw in bishop takes d6 and win this pawn on e4. So black took on f4, white took on d5, black threw in the intermezzo, bishop h2 check. And now we have even material, but we have the potential for a knight blockade against a questionable light squared bishop. So now that we're at the live position, Jennifer, Katerina, I think we can all agree that white is better, but the question is how much?
I do agree with that. White is better. The passed pawn on c5, that will be at one moment, will be very strong. And the bishop on e6 is not doing anything. It's just like a pawn. It has the same responsibility now, just to defend the pawn on d5. So after knight d4, a lot of squares that are weak on the queen side, I will definitely prefer to play this for white.
But how much? If you got draw odds as black, would you take you? If I got, let me answer my question. If I got draw odds as black, I would take black here. How about you guys?
I think white.
I think I would white. Okay.
Oh, gosh, I'm gonna spend like 5 more seconds waiting, and then she played c6. I was going to say I like the c6 move, and now I'll take white.
Oh, I didn't see c6. I thought it was my move, and I could take on c5. Okay, go ahead.
No, but we're making the same point. So essentially, if it were black's turn, let's say white made some move that looks pretty decent, like say a rook c3 or something of the sort. If black is able to take on c5 and trade some pawns here, at least now there's opportunity for counterplay. Yeah. And that's why the c6 move was so strong, in my opinion. It's saying, well, look at your rooks. We talked about stunt doubles with the knights. These rooks are just competing for the same squares. And even if you stack them on the c file, white simply puts his knight on d4, can even play b5 later if needed. And you've closed down the lines for black's pieces. So white has much more space, the length of the c file up to c6, the knight coming in d4. As Katerina said, the bishop is just a big pawn sitting on e6. This is looking very unpleasant for black, even if it's not objectively a losing position. By objectively, I mean, if white plays every single best move, I'm not certain this would be a win if black plays best moves of his own. Just, it looks really nice, though, for white side.
So, Robert, I still kind of don't have the answer from you. So would you take white or black if, let's say, there was an exchange on c5?
I would, if there's exchange on c5, then I would take black with draw odds. Without this, now on c6, I'm certainly taking white, even if I have to win the game. I think that the advantage is pretty significant here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that the problem is this outside the pass pawn with the ideas that you're mentioning just seem too dangerous. And maybe I can try to play like a5 here, but then you have b5. Oh, I'm just dying to get some counterplay here. b5, knight d4, a5. It doesn't quite work. I'm trying to make anything active work, and it's just not happening.
Yeah, I mean, if you ever play b5, the whole point is that when you play a5, you are forcing a line open, but you've also given the c5 square to the white rook. The d4 knight will hit the b5 pawn. Just feels like every single little thing here is working out well for white. However, I don't think we should count out black's position just yet, because you just need to come up with potential trades that would work. And what do I mean by that? Let's try to use our imagination for a second. If all the rooks are traded, and that's, I mean, I don't know how that's going to happen, and we get rid of some of these queenside pawns, let's say I have to sacrifice my bishop for those pawns, what kind of trades will optimize black's drawing chances? I mean, this is a really hard thing to envision from this position, but that's how I tend to think about the game of chess. Is like, what trades do I want to see happen if my position is worse? Are there any end games down the road that I can get in, even if I have to give a bishop for 2 pawns? Will that actually increase my drawing chances? Where is the hope is the essential question that I'm asking, and I don't know.
What I think is also a question is how white's going to continue. So if I play, let's say, a6 as black and king e6, then I'm kind of just holding on to my position and like looking for what white is going to do, because you can't really play on the king side. You have a pawn, your pawn down there. And on the queen side, when you move one of the pawns, it's going to be blocked. So white really needs to decide, okay, how white actually is getting some advantage on the queen side.
Fair. I think knight to d4, maybe pawn f3, king f2, just make moves that look relatively straightforward without risk. But I think black can try to play f6 and bishop f7, bishop e8, and reroute this bishop to, and b5 was played. Jennifer, your move. Your move b5 played, and her plan is clear. I see his plan is clear, but your plan.
Yeah. Gosh, it's always a mixed bag when you get credit for a move like b5 because it looks ugly in some ways. Again, I'm just desperate to get some counterplay here. I do feel like that's the best way when you're in a passive position to try to get some counterplay. But you mentioned this idea of rook c5 and rook c1, not even messing with knight d4. It is another opportunity. But Nicholas just played knight to d4 because I think the problem is like if you play a5 here, and I play knight takes b5, rook b8, rook c5, and you're not winning back your pawn on b4. So that's
And you can also, instead of taking on b5, play rook c5. You have plenty of options here from white's perspective on how you want to go after this b5 pawn. So it's just an unpleasant position, and that's always the biggest thing in my eyes, is that if you can keep this nagging advantage and black can hardly move, sooner or later human players end up doing something that that they can't take back. So nobody likes to defend passively unless you're Sergei Karyakin, who somehow, some way, every single time, like, oh, he's going to lose this game because he is only the first and second ranked for his pieces. He just shuffles his pieces for 65 moves, and you're like, okay, no progress being made here. That guy is a defensive maestro.
Yes, and it's always hard to play, as you said, kind of passively for black or for anybody who is just having not a great position. But it's very important because here we see that I think that b5 just created more weaknesses and made the life even more difficult for black. And after, doubling the rooks and then even transferring the knight from b3 to a5 to b7, it's going to be very hard for black to move there.
Nice positional game, and this is a very grueling tournament. So playing a game like this with white, where you're not super stressed, it's a really sweet thing, right? I mean, how much fun are you having if you have this position with white? You are not sitting there sweating.
No, you are not. And when you're up, 17 minutes in the clock, honestly, every single move for black will take a couple minutes because you don't know if you're making a move that will just hang your position in the balance. And for white, you can play so many different things. Rook f to c1 comes natural. King h2, king g3, king f4. All these moves can be played without any sort of hesitation. And black, on the other hand, do you play a move like g5 at some point? Or is that overextending on the king side? Do you try to play f6 and bishop f7? But you can't really do that so easy because then the f5 square. I just see a lot of drawbacks in black's position, and for white, it's just, you can even play f4, or do you play f3? Both moves look plenty good to me. I'd probably play f3, king f2, etc. I just don't see how black does anything of consequence besides play king d6, rook c7, rook b6, and hope that this will hold on. Yeah, it's just no fun.
I'm suggesting to move away from this position. It's a torture for black. It's very comfortable position for white that white can just play very slowly and still enjoy perfect pieces. So it's
I'm happy to move on as well, but where to?
Yeah, we haven't checked in on Jen Yu's game for a little while. I was intrigued by that one earlier. Remember, she had that nice pawn structure, c3, d4, e3.
Wow,
and
this one has changed a lot.
Oh yeah, wow. Gosh, count the material.
Okay, so bishop e6 was played by black, queen to d7, and f5. So that actually is a very instructive move on move 13 for black, f5, because white has pushed many of her pawns to dark squares, which leaves some of the light squares vulnerable. So if you play e5, for instance, now look at these squares here. They're under black's control. You can play bishop b5, play e6, and then b5 even, and just say, hey, thank you for the light squares. So Jennifer did not play e5. She played d5, traded the pawns here, and then put rook to b1, and bishop on b6, going after this a5 pawn, and queen to d6. Cannot take on a5. Don't blunder that, because queen c5 is check, and also a check to your bishop. So it's defending tactically. And after king h1, knight to b4. What a little tactical shot hitting the bishop. This is an interesting game.
Wow, knight b4 is a very nice move. I do like it. The knight was doing nothing on h6, and now on b4 it's at least getting to the play.
Yeah, and there was a tickle. Rook went to a8, bishop to d4, and the knight stole this pawn on b5, and the Jennifer stole the pawn at b7. I think we must all be in agreement that that pawn trade has to be beneficial for black, whose knight went from a6 into d5.
I mean, if you can trade side pawn for a center pawn, that's always a good trade.
This looks nice for black.
Yeah, nice. Well done by black. You know, we were talking about her difficult situation against our reigning U.S. women's champion, multiple time National Girls Tournament of Champions winner. But Jen is always good at fighting till the end, guys. So and fighting for the win. So it doesn't always matter what her position is. We've seen that.
Do you know who her opponent is? It's Zoe Tang. I don't know.
Yeah, Zoe Tang. We mentioned before. She's a 14-year-old, 2100 from Oregon.
Okay, well, there you have it. So she's, her rating is quite high herself. So she's playing well. We shouldn't be surprised by that. I know Jennifer. I coached her at the 2018 Olympic team, and I saw her win the 2019 U.S. Women's Championship. You sort of expect big things, and that takes pressure off her opponent, because now her opponent can just play her game. And you look at the clock, Jennifer down almost 18 minutes. The position is looking totally solid for black here. Better pawn structure, pieces coordinated very well. Could Jennifer be in some trouble here?
But I'm wondering, Robert, the bishops are still really strong. One on d4, one on g2, and the diagonal is kind of the bishop on g2 eyeing on the rook on a8. So what if I play some forcing moves? So I start with capture on g7.
Well, black does get a move in between. Otherwise, I would agree with you. Bishop takes g7.
Okay, I kind of missed that, because after bishop takes g7, king takes g7, queen d4, and some c4, I think there are some issues on the back rank, on the 7th rank, and on the diagonal.
Yes, I agree. So I went king h8 just to give white the move. That would be true. And it's good to think this way. Like, if white had a free move, what would white threaten? And Katerina, your point is well taken, that if it were white's turn, bishop takes g7, queen d4. So let's not allow that to happen so easily. And I'm not sure what move, maybe rook f to b8, just to offer a rook exchange, or rook a to b8. One of these type of moves are certainly possible here to try to trade off this very powerful rook on b7.
Yeah, rook a b8 looks like a very good move.
And well, it was just played. So Zoe listening to us.
And by the way, I mean, for those of you who are just joining us, we've got these two incredible Tournament of State Champions going on, as well as the seniors event. The reason we're not focusing as much on that, guys, is that its thrilling conclusion is taking place next weekend. So that one is stretched out over the 2 weekends. So we'll really get into the heavy hitting matches in that next weekend, I think, guys. But this weekend, we are going to have a Denker champion and a National Girls Tournament of State champions, a Haring champ. And they're going to take home some really nice scholarship money, which is so sweet to see, as these players are all either going to college in the fall, or, many of them are thinking about college in the next few years. And I think it's $2,000 for each tournament. And just big thank you for everyone who made it happen. It's just I wasn't sure this tournament was going to happen, and the amount of energy that it took to put it on in July as scheduled is really admirable.
Definitely. And the prize fund is, as you said, $2,000 for the winners of those sections. It's in the form of college scholarships. It's clearly beneficial for the players, and it's great for everybody that these tournaments are taking place because it's a fun event for these qualifiers, right? They made their way, they earned the right to represent their state. And whether they have a rating of 1,000 or of 2,500, they earned that right, and it's an honor for them, and they want to take part in such a fun event. So,
and by the way, I think it. Oh, sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
But I think it's more than a $2,000 prize fund. I think the first prize is $2,000. But maybe if we can get those graphics again, you can see the breakdown. And yeah, big thank you for the legacy of Denker and to the Schifrin family for sponsoring the Haring. And of course, to Barber and Rockefeller and Sunil Weeramantry for everything, as those tournaments took place yesterday and next weekend, respectively. Guys, who won the Sunil Weeramantry Blitz event?
Nico Cheka.
Okay.
Speed skater, grandmaster.
Yeah, Robert, you talk about fun. Sorry, Jen, to interrupt, but we can go back to the game Carissa against Martha because there is some fun. The Knight takes B2 actually happened.
Yay! And how long did Martha think before she uncorked it?
That's a good question.
We'll see. 28. She's got 28 minutes now, so probably she thought she had about 36 when the move started. So probably about 8 minutes. Yeah.
And this, we left over C4, and everything that we looked at has happened with the knight takes, sacrificing this knight, and bishop to E4. And then look at that move, H6, trying to kick this knight away from G5. And, well, that looks like a pretty decent move there.
And then C4, C3 can follow. This can be very dangerous for white, but maybe there are some chances to sacrifice some pieces, Robert. They're not ours. Maybe we can try to do that.
So how would you sacrifice the pieces?
I'm looking at knight takes E6, pawn takes E6, and then bishop takes F5. I don't know how you're going to recapture. Let's say with rook or pawn, and then take on H6.
Wow, how many pieces did you sacrifice? It felt like all of them. And at the end of the day, black is up a bishop, and the king isn't too unsafe. So I'll just play rook F7 and ask you what piece you want to sacrifice next, because I promise you I'll take it.
Now I just want to play E6 and capture your rook.
And I'll just slide my rook on over here, and I'm
in trouble.
You want to checkmate me, but my rook is sitting happily. So
okay, so we can't sacrifice too much.
You can try, but unfortunately, she went knight back to F3, and then now black's turn again. But I guess you were not able to get away with that sacrifice. And yeah, so it's going to be tough to see how white crashes through and delivers any sort of checkmating attack. And if that's the case, here come the pawns. This is a pawn storm. And, you know, instead of a wise pawn, it feels like 3 wise pawns because B4, C4, D3, yikes.
I mean, the queen will run out of squares to go to.
C3, D2, or C2. It just feels like all the moves are easy to see for black, and I don't know how white is planning to continue after this. So
yeah, this is a very hard decision for white.
Well, to all of our new viewers who may have just joined us from the Chess.com events page, welcome to the Denker and Haring tournaments of state champions. We have a lot of prize money at stake here, so these are going to be in the form of scholarships with $2,000, the top prize in both the Denker and the Haring, as well as the Barber and Rockefellers next week, and the Senior also has plenty of prize money. And just an overarching picture to those of you who are new here, you'll see that there are many different events, 6 events throughout this weekend and next. Started with the Sunil Weeramantry Blitz tournament last night. We're in the midst of the Denker and the Haring and the tournament of senior state champions. And next week will be the K5 and the 6 through 8 tournaments, the Rockefeller and the Barber events. So much action, so much chess. it's a very exciting couple weekends here.
Oh yeah. Great chess going on. And it's new. We're used to seeing lots of great rapid and blitz events, but this time control, we haven't been seeing much. And it's of course has its negatives, but I like that they're getting a chance to play a slow game, don't you?
I'm happy about it, especially because there's so many of them. We can go from game to game to game, catch the exciting moments, and for the players, it is certainly great practice.
And I think they are also happy because online you can play a lot of blitz with people all over the world, but playing serious games with like a similar opponent, it can be very hard, and it can take a lot of time to find somebody if you just randomly decide to play online. So I think the girls could be also excited to have time to kind of show their best game.
Certainly. And I just want to make note that Rochelle Wu has won her game, and the final move was a really nice one. Was after knight to d8, played by a Panda Pie Pie. What a great unit. Queen takes e8 check is a wonderful tactic. You give up your queen for a rook, but you get interest because at the end this rook takes knight on d8. This is why you do your tactics. You lose your queen for this rook, and white ends up a knight in addition to the pawn that she was already up. So a nice way to finish that game for Rochelle Wu.
Nice 2-0 start to our former champion.
Yeah, nothing to complain about here. Just simple tactic in her eyes, won her the game, moves to a perfect score, 2-0. So where to next? We have.
I'm interested in going back to Alice games because there is some also fun going on.
Oh yeah,
Knights attacked.
What just happened here? H4 was played. So what an aggressive move, but the queen lacks squares. So let's go back. E5, knights on queen E4. So she did, in fact, offer the queen trade. Very smart. Mentioned the E4 square was available to her pieces. She wants to trade queens, go after the E6 and the B7 pawns. So her opponent said, no, not so fast. And then H4, queen has to go back. And then G4 traps the knight on H5. Wow. Wow.
Those are really brave moves.
And it's brave, but the knight is trapped. And she figured out that my king looks a little unsafe. But if I'm going to be able to trade queens and win your knight, and after knight F5, so your G-pawn can't move, that's pinned. Okay, king H2. Now my G-pawn can certainly move. And both of your knights are up for capture.
And also look at the time advantage. It's 47 minutes against 21 minutes. That can be hard when you play endgames then to have less time.
Yeah, this looks like it should be. Should be
nice,
Alice's game quite clearly.
Nicely done by Alice. And I can't help but think, do you think she's going to get paired up in the next round? I feel like she might. She's rated 6. It's going to be close, I think. She's rated 6 in the event. And I feel like we might see her up against like Annie or Jen in the next round.
Well, if those players can win their games and we can see Alice take this one and play them, that's going to be very exciting because she is somebody who is more than capable of landing an upset. And you see, she's 10 years old. She's a national master, 2,200 U.S. chess rating. You don't know quite how talented, what the potential is like. And I actually often avoid talking about potential because I think it puts a lot of undue burden and pressure on these just young kids. At the end of the day, they're kids. They're great chess players, but they're young people. And for example, Tani, right? He's an amazing story. He's an inspiration. And people try to interview me and ask, like, well, what do you think? Like, is he going to become the world champion someday? And like, that's not fair. That's not fair for me to say anything of that sort because let the kid be a kid who plays chess instead of saying this person has the potential. And if they don't become the next X player, then are they a disappointment? And of course, we know some famous examples of this. And I'm not calling anybody disappointment, but think about how much pressure must have been on Josh Waite's when Searching for Bobby Fischer came out, right? And didn't Fred, his father, say like in some ways he regretted that whole decision-making process because it really put so much on his young son?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Robert. I think that's a great way to look at it. We're so like, as a society, we tend to be like so future and past oriented, but enjoy the present when these young players are so good. Just marvel in that and instead of constantly project what's going to happen. I love that attitude. And Jeff Whiteskin, himself wrote a great book called The Art of Learning, highly recommended, where he talks about some of the pitfalls and the way he approached chess and how he adjusted that when he took up martial arts. And I think one of them was just an overall more positive attitude where he would look for things that he loved about his craft and focus on them instead of constantly being like, well, what's wrong with me? And what am I doing wrong? And let me spend all my time on that. And it's just a great way to look at things.
Yeah, I also agree. And I think that's a huge message for parents to be easy on their kids and let them learn. And sometimes they practice a lot, they work, they do their puzzles and, openings, and then they play a tournament and maybe it does not work as they expected, but that's fine. There is a learning curve to everything, and there's need for patience.
Yeah, you don't have to be the next anybody. You just have to be the best you that you can be. And it sounds cliche, perhaps, and I don't really care if it does. I think it's true. And I've coached enough people and seen enough kids, in my own experience of growing up and being, a chess player that was highly rated. It can be extremely detrimental for the psyche of kids. But for the most part, these events are extremely positive. I don't want to, I just saw actually, Nico Checo won his game. Speaking of positive, that's a good result for him as he works his way towards a Denker championship. That's his goal. He was tied for the U.S. Junior Championship and lost in the tiebreak match to a Wonder Liang. So he split the points in the tournament and then lost the tiebreak, unfortunately for him. He's looking to add another trophy to his shelf.
Oh, yeah, plenty of them. And hey, no problem with the cliches right now, Robert. It's a difficult time for a lot of people right now. And I think it's an even more important time to give kids like space to not put too much pressure on them or compare themselves to other people, because they don't have as much control over things as they normally would. And that is difficult for everyone, but especially for young people. So I love your motivational words. And I think we're going to take a quick break as we get into the real heated moments coming up in round 2.
Let's do it. And we come back. Jennifer takes a little bit of a break, but no rest for us. Katerina, you had mentioned this game that was one you wanted to look at. And I see a pawns in c6. It looks like a pretty good position for white. So what has happened in this game, if you don't mind taking us back through it?
Yeah, so let's go back a couple moves because there has been a lot of tactics happening.
Okay, I'm going to go all the way back to move 7 in this game, and you tell me when to stop and where these tactics were unleashed.
This looks like a normal position, nothing to worry about. F3 is an interesting move to kick the knight away and finish development.
So we saw a trade, the knight came to g3, and then e5. So I imagine this is where things got explosive.
I mean, e5 is a logical move, right? White did not castle, so black wants to open the file as soon as possible. The rook is ready for it on e8. The question is if there are more pieces ready to attack the king or only the rook.
White said, I'm going to take on d5, and when you take on d4, I can just take the queen on d4. And oh my gosh, now no wonder you wanted to see this game. This is some beautiful stuff.
So now black played knight c6, which is a very tricky move. Now you might want to take it with the pawn, but obviously the queen is hanging on d4 because the pawn on e3 is pinned, and you cannot unfortunately recapture.
Wow. So instead of that, so not blundering the queen, white does a queen sacrifice. The queen takes g7 check, which was awesome to see. King take, and then knight f5 check with the 4. This is unbelievable stuff here. King f6, thank you for your queen. You have to take back. And when all is said and done, white is up, what, two pawns?
Yes, white is up 2 pawns. And I mean, great pawn structure. The pawn on c6 is a really powerful pawn. And I think black missed this because knight c6 looked like a really tricky move, really sneaky and good move. But queen takes g7 was amazing kind of return.
Wow. And white is, I'm looking at the ratings of the players, white is outrated by several hundred points. So this would be an upset, at least on paper. Her US rating is 828, Amanda Losef, against Yili Wen, who is 2109. So several hundred-point upset here, nearly 300 points, and quite a tactic there.
Yeah, we've been talking about doing tactics, doing positional chess, but I mean, so far tactics, it's so important for your game.
And part of what must be frustrating for black in this game is she spent 10 minutes to play knight c6. And so she clearly was thinking, and I'm guessing she just didn't see queen takes g7. It wasn't something on her register. In this position before knight to c6, she was probably thinking, do I play queen takes d5? Do I move my knight out to d7? Do I do something here? Queen takes d5 probably doesn't end so well because the c7 pawn at the end of this is hanging. And so white is just attacking too much and curling up the pawn. So knight c6 played after a 10-minute think, but then that sacrifice, and wow, with the fork and 2 extra pawns here. Katerina, this looks like it should just be a winning position for white, though. How can black make her life difficult?
That's a good question. I just want to say that this continuation shows that maybe e5 was premature. Maybe black should have focused on finishing development instead of immediately opening up the center, or maybe trying to open up the center with playing c5. Mm-hmm. But okay, I mean, it was a good idea with knight c6. Unfortunately, it did not work. So let's see how to try to get away from what happened. Rook c8 is another nice trick. You can take the bishop, the pawn kind of removes, and then the rook is hanging.
Yep. And so you can't do that. So maybe bishop to b5, very straightforward. Let me just protect my pawn on c6, develop my piece. And generally speaking, this e3 pawn can't be captured because if the rook takes e3, king d2, it not only attacks the rook on e3, it protects the rook on c1, which means the bishop on b7 is in some big trouble.
Can I show you one more beautiful idea?
Show
me. So if you move it back, and let's say after bishop b5,
yes,
black plays a6.
Uh-huh.
Now I can take the bishop. You can take the rook on c1. Mm-hmm. I play king d2. And if you decide to take the other rook, then I take the rook on e8, but you cannot stop the promotion anymore. So that's a very interesting line.
Wow. And that would be a pretty forcing line that black would just have to contend with, and there's no way to stop that pawn from promoting. That's another good tactical shot here. And so many different tactics in what's it's move 20 of this game, bishop b5 just played. But at this point, c takes b7, if a6 is played, it's fairly straightforward. So I think that she will find it. That's why bishop a8 was the choice instead. And I do think that black has some outside chances to hold this game. It's going to be tough. It's only going to happen if white makes some mistakes. But I'm already looking at this rook coming to e5, maybe rook over to c5, where if I can get this pawn to c6, I'm only down one pawn. I will have some chances to draw certain endgames.
I mean, it's important to not lose hopes and to try to play the best, even if the position is not particularly great.
Yes, you have to believe that you have some chances. Otherwise, you won't find them when they're presented to you.
That's definitely a very good attitude for chess. King f2 makes total sense, kind of connecting the rooks, not going to the d file because maybe the white rook will go to d1 and to attack the d6 pawn. I do like this move, king f2.
Yeah, king f2, just keep everything safe and sound, protected, and, well, your next move can be rook h1 d1, and that's why the king has been on f2 than on d2, because you have an open line here, and after rook to e5, I would play a4. Just keep that bishop safe. And if I'm black, I'm thinking a6. I just want to take this pawn to c6. I know I'm down 2 pawns. I know the position will be bad regardless. I'm just hoping that somehow, some way, down just a couple pawns, I'll be able to hold certain positions. And one thing, Katerina, that I always point out, which is totally irrelevant just yet, this is a light square bishop. That's a dark square corner on h8. So you think about potential ways to draw a game like this. If white is left with only this bishop on b5 or anywhere on the light squares and this pawn on h2, this would be a draw. So imagine all the pieces come off except for the bishop and the pawn, what's highlighted in green. That is a theoretically drawn position. So I know it's really far away. It probably will not happen. But as you said, Katerina, you need to think of a way to hold on. Otherwise, you never will be able to. And okay, bishop d3 was just played, and I think that's already potentially a step in the wrong direction.
Because now you are wanting to take on h7, but then the pawn, exactly what you said. What I want to pitch you, Robert, is the game that we looked before at, which was Crunch against Confused, because there was another tactics that we can review.
Well, I'm at the
and
live
let's see
position, and white's up a piece.
Yes, so there was some problem happening before, some problems. So let's move back to see how white got this piece.
Okay, so we left off around move 21 when black played queen to d8. And we were talking about the exchange sacrifice or not. Instead, white went knight to d5, hoping that black captured twice and the f7 pawn would be a problem. So black went knight to g8, b3. What a calm move to play by white here. Just, trying to play c4, I guess. And after rook e6, rook f5, queen e8, queen h4, increasing some pressure here. It's hard for black to make any moves, Katerina.
This is so difficult to play for black. I mean, the rook on d7, it's like it cannot do anything. You can move it to c7. It does nothing on d8. The knights are the stunt knights, as we learned today, not particularly great in this position, especially as none of them is in the center. And white is just increasing the pressure on the king. Maybe even g4, g5 can follow.
So we saw queen to d8, queen to g3, not allowing some kind of knight takes and a queen trade being offered. The queen came back, knight, ooh, pawn takes, rook g6, queen f. I didn't like opening up this bishop. You talked about it a long time ago. And after rook f6, queen e4, takes g6. So where's the crazy tactics? I'm still waiting for it.
So let's just go back just 1 second. The g6 was a really strong move and kind of one of the only moves because white has a threat. If we go one more move before, one more back.
Where you want me to go?
Oh, actually here, yeah. Because white threatens to take on f6 even 2 times and checkmate on h7. So that's really a problem.
Just trying to take back here twice and then get the checkmate on h7. You want to look when the bishop and the queen are lined up, which is why rook f5, queen with g6 was played. But the problem with playing g6 is after knight f6, rook takes f6 was spotted, the queen has to capture, and then the rook on d7 lost its defender. Oops. Good tactical vision by Charisse Woods with the white pieces.
But it's really hard to play such position for black if you are constantly defending, playing passive moves, that in one moment you are so happy you can finally develop your piece, and it's not a good move.
Yeah, she probably should have played king g7 first just to protect the f6 square. Unfortunately, after knight f6, rook takes. Now it's just a piece up for white. And as long as you don't allow a draw by repetition, which you shouldn't, you can play bishop to f1 here, for instance, to take away the checks. And then white should be able to convert this relatively smoothly.
Yeah. So this should be easy for white to win. So maybe we can move on to another game, one of the top games. What about Jennifer Yu's game?
Okay, where is that? I see. I have it open. I know there it is, a happy pawn. And whoa, okay. So there's a rook on b2 now. There was a rook on b7, but now black went rook to b8 and got this rook down to b2, while white stole a pawn on a5. We only have had a couple moves played since we last looked. And to my eyes, black has to be doing well with all the activity. How about yours, Katerina? Is Jennifer going to do okay here? Or, I mean, black looks good to me and up a lot of time.
I'm a little worried about the dark squares, especially the e5 squares. So if I take on g7 and then put my queen on d4.
Again, it's black's turn. I know I keep tricking you with this situation. We were trying to take on g7, but black does get to move here.
Okay. I always forget about that because I like the capture on g7. I'm wondering why it did not happen before. Can you just move one move backward? Oh, white captured the pawn, so that's probably better than capturing the bishop.
You could have gone with this, but instead just took a pawn, which, as you said, you take one, you're happy about it. You have an extra pawn in the position now. Whose dark squares are weaker? You mentioned e5, but what about e3? Isn't that a potential problem?
But we also see that the knight is kind of already attacked by the bishop and the rook and the queen. I mean, yes, I agree. e3 is weak as well. But I'm trying to look at my attacking chances, not my defending.
True. And actually, right here, you can take on d4, because if you don't take with the queen on d4, knight e3 happens. You have to take with the queen, and this is very forcing. Rook takes e2, bishop takes d5. We can just take on d5 with check. I think your queen should take on d5 is my guess, because the king on h1 is the weaker king. And then we get to this endgame, which looks like it should be a draw at first glance, but then I see rook to b8, rook to b2, and then I'm not so sure anymore.
Luckily, I have maybe a rook e5 and rook takes e7 and kind of doing the same thing.
That is it's a fortunate break here to be able to play rook e5. And I don't think that white's completely out of the woods in the endgame, but it does allow, as you're saying, if the rook moves off the e2 square, e7 falls, and then I'm threatening a checkmate of my own. So I was hoping that you wouldn't have this move, and rook b8 to b2 is just too overwhelming, but you found a very important move.
But a very good play. I mean, we have to say that black is doing really well, kind of keeping up with Jennifer.
Look at that move. Knight to e3 was played in the game instead of bishop takes d4, and she's just trying to trade pieces and say, I don't want to risk anything. Bishop e3, we just take on d1, rook takes d1, rook takes e2, bishop under attack, c3 pawn, a2 pawn. All of these are under threat, and bishop to d4 says, let's trade pieces. We'll take on a2 at the end of this. Probably is just an equal endgame.
Yes, I think we can expect draw in this game, which is a good result probably for both opponents.
For sure. And well, we are going to take another quick break because we're bringing Jennifer back. So for those of you that missed her, she will return in just a few minutes. And we return with more coverage of the Denker and Haring tournaments. And the player on screen is Robert Shlutenko taking Ron Hanley. But of course, we want to welcome back our lovely commentator, Jennifer Shahade. Jennifer, we missed you.
Oh, thank you. I'm sure nothing too crazy happened while I was gone, but I did see Martha's pawns get pretty deep into White's position. But right now we're looking at Robert's game, your namesake, and he has a nice little pawn of his own on d3. Is that a rock in his throat or a weakness?
Well, we looked at a Jennifer game earlier, and you were saying, let's go Jennifer, and I got kind of jealous that I wanted to root for a Robert. So this pawn on d3 just landed there as Black put the knight from c5 into d3. White was forced to take, otherwise this b2 pawn or this rook on e1 would have been in trouble. And I think that the pawn is safe and sound for now, because how are you actually going to attack it?
I guess the only way would be to move our knight. We could play queen b1, but that doesn't look too appealing. Or knight move to f1 or f1 or b1. I don't know. That doesn't look smart at all. So probably to f1.
Katerina, you sort of looked like you didn't love either of these knights move, or maybe you just don't like White's position.
I mean, playing knight b1 when the rook is on a2, I do understand we want to take the pawn. I mean, that makes total sense, but that is so sad to just go backward with the knight. I don't know where the knight started, probably on g1, but I think about playing b4, just ignoring the pawn on d3 for a little while, and then playing knight b3 or maybe even b5. I mean, I don't want to open up the position too much because Black has a pair of bishops, but I do need to activate the rook from a2. So at least b4, knight b3, and then maybe bringing the rook to d2 or f2.
Well, you told me you don't want. Sorry, you told me you don't want to open up the position. So I'm after b4, I'd play knight to g4 and give up my knight here, try to win your knight on c3, threaten bishop b4 check, and it just looks like the position is going to open up whether you like it or not.
Yeah, I was thinking of something similar, Robert, except I was going to maybe try to play knight h5, attacking the knight on c3, and then my knight on f4 would just be such a pretty square to land on.
Also looks really powerful.
Yeah.
So b4, I definitely like the idea of sticking a knight on b3, so much more harmonious, but it seems very loose tactically. But maybe there's maybe knight b1 is too ugly. What about my other suggestion of knight f1? Where do you play just f4 and then I'm trying to stick something on e4, but the problem is that bishop's coming to f5 at the end of the variation.
This doesn't look fun. The pawn on d3 becomes a strength rather than a weakness, and Black finalizes his development, and White's king is the one that's in more danger. Black has more control across the entire board here. This is not an ideal situation for White.
Well, let's look at that again, though. Okay, so how about knight e4 right now?
Okay, and then if I trade you on e4?
So if I trade, the problem is if I take with the pawn, you have f3, which is pretty nasty. And if I take with the rook, then you have bishop to f5. Yeah, and maybe rook e7 there. I can try to finagle some counterplay. I don't know. But yeah, it does not look very fun at all for White.
No. I don't envy the position one bit.
So advantage for Robert. And how about Praveen? We were looking at his position earlier and we were actually arguing over who's better, White or Black. What do you guys think now?
Katerina,
I'll let you have the first go at this one.
So first I want to see whose turn it is. Okay, so it's White's turn. Okay.
It's White's turn, yeah.
That's a good, important information for me. Okay, material is equal. That's good. Black is having some pressure on the C file, maybe threatening B4, but that may not necessarily be a big issue because White can just push C4 and have a very nice strong center. I think I like White's position. I mean, the knight on F4 is very strong, but I don't see how Black can do something with his pawns because E5 is always met by D5. And again, I'm very happy for having a pass pawn. Maybe I can actually even take because then there will be another weakness on E5 if Black plays E5. So I do like White's position here.
I feel like I still like black because of the H file, which was just occupied with the move rook to H8. And I'm like really liking the coordination of black. If I get to play rook H3, I don't want to be super passive for white, but I'm going to have to defend that F pawn. And how else am I going to do it? But like rook F2 or rook F1.
Yeah, it looks like you are forcing the passivity, and the reason why white didn't go rook h1 first, because white was, had the move. Rook h1 would have walked into some kind of rook c7 stuff, and this pawn on c3 was really weak here. And so, because of that threat, it seems that's why white and such as move king out of the way and give up control of the only fully open file on the board. So that was a big decision there, either to allow c3 to be attacked or to drop the king over and allow f3 to be attacked. I like black's position as well. I think that it's going to be a really tough defensive task, especially with 15 minutes fewer on the clock.
Good job, by the way, to Andrew Hong, who goes by Speed of Light, which is kind of nice because it's like you can read it as Speed of Light or Speed of Flight.
Yeah.
He's from Northern California, and by the way, you might be confused by that. We do have 2 Californian representatives in these competitions because California is such a big state, such a big chess state that they get a Southern and a Northern representative, and even with 2 spots, it still tends to be a very competitive players, as you see in this case. They're actually ranked 3rd, Andrew Hong and Robert Shalenko, who's sorry, I mispronounced that name. But his game, who we looked at earlier, is ranked 6th in the competition. And Andrew just won his 2nd game in a row. So he starts out with a nice 2-0 score, joining Nicholas Cheka at the top.
Yeah, and I'm just showing the final stages of that game where he was up 3 pawns in an opposite colored bishop ending. So that was too many. And so he was able to just put his rook down on d8, now forcing either the rook exchange, but you can't exchange as I get a queen after bishop e7. Well, thank you for your rook. Your bishop is overloaded, and that's how the game ended. So just too many extra pawns for Andrew.
Oh boy, we're going to see a lot of really nice games in the next round, I think, as there's going to be so many fewer perfect scores, and I think we're really going to start seeing heavy hitters in all tournaments playing each other. Where do you guys want to go next?
I want to go to the game that had Katerina's eye earlier between Charisse Woods and not Charisse. Charisse Woods is Cruncha, who's winning her game, or has been winning. But this game between Pillsbury Bind, a 101, and Nanji Bear, that is Amanda Losef taking on Yili Wen. And in this position here, the last one play was e4, because black has this offer of bishops here on d3 and b5. So if you want to keep these bishops as they are, you'd have to move your rook over to square h5. The problem with rook h5 is white has this beautiful move, e5 check, cutting this rook on h5 off from the defense of this bishop on b5. So after d takes e5, thank you for your bishop. Now white is up a minor piece and will go on to win the endgame. So you're not able to keep the status quo, in which case you probably have to take on d3, which liquidates into a good position for white.
Meanwhile, Carissa Yip fans, she did lose her last round, but unsurprisingly, she is coming back. She's about to force resignation in her game as she's up 2 pawns in a simple pawn end game. So I wouldn't be surprised if she wins a bunch of games in a row after losing that first round.
This is pretty much as straightforward as it gets. You say up 2 pawns, the king can also just come in, steal all the remaining pawns. There's no hope whatsoever for white.
And another player who's up just 1 pawn, but it feels kind of like 2, is the happy farmer, Annie Wang, #1 seed in the girls tournament on champions. And if you look at that pawn on e4 that she's up, you can see why I say it feels like 2 pawns, because not only do you take the pawn off, but you also take all of the squares that pawn was helping protect.
And the bishop on b7 is really strong here. How did this happen? Because I think in the opening we saw c4 played, and that's really where we left off. And white went for d4. We were looking at plan a4, b3 on the queen side. So Katerina she went for d4 after your c4 suggestion. I guess she didn't get the position she wanted.
Yes, I was not super sure about playing d4 here because I did like your idea with b3 and a4 more. So the d4 pawn would after remain on the board. But white should still be doing fine after this. So let's see what happened.
Okay, and so we saw the capture back on d3, bishop g7, and black just simply moved all these natural moves, castle with the knight to c5, and then put h6 to attack this bishop here. So it seems like black really didn't do anything substantial. The rerouting of the pieces was easier for her, and after a move like f4, that's a move that you can never take back. And look what Annie did. She put b4, saying your knight on d4 needs that pawn's defense, and otherwise you're breaking open the position. And so we saw b takes c3, knight came to a4, the rook can come to c8 next. Oof, that's a weakness that you cannot handle.
Yeah, I think f4 was a little premature. Again, opening up or playing on the king side with pawns without having full development of the pieces can be a bit dangerous. So maybe knight b3 was an alternative.
That definitely looks better to my eyes because you're getting rid of your pieces are blocking each other. Your rook wants an open d file. You want to trade off some of black's more aggressive pieces. Unfortunately, what she did with this f4, it just backfired very quickly as black's swiftly attacked squares, and then the e4 pawn did fall at the end here. There was no way to protect the pawn because if the knight moved back to d2, the bishop takes the knight on d4. If you play e5, I just simply take it. I have too many pieces aiming at the square. So this is just now pretty straightforward game for Annie. So do we have any other games we want to look at? So many options, honestly.
I mean, I should just point out it's not the most interesting game, but I would like to point out that it does look like Chen Yu's not going to get a win, that it's a likely draw. I know that seems like a bold statement, but because anything can happen in what is now rapid chess, but really, if you look at that position, it's 4 versus 4 and 1 rook for each side. So it's an upset draw by her opponent. And the U.S. women's champion seems likely to have to concede a half point.
Yeah, that's going to be the case here. And out of the corner of my eye, I spot a wild game that I feel like we should go to. And that is between a Raging Knight NC, assuming that player is from North Carolina. Really tough guess there. And that's John Jules Scott with the white pieces taking on Nathaniel Moore with the black pieces. And what a position we have here with this king on f1. And what's the material count? I don't even know. It's an extra pawn for black, the bishop pair for white. Who's better and why?
Well, while Katarina takes the tough question, I am first going to tell you that Raging Knight NC is not from North Carolina, but actually plays for Connecticut. So he tricked you.
What?
Maybe he was born in North Carolina. I guess we can find out later why he's called NC.
That confused me. But Katarina, the tough question's yours. Sorry.
So that's totally fine. So first, let's look at, instead of king g1, what if white played king e1? Because there is another strong tactics that black has. So king e1 and rook takes e3, very strong. And after pawn takes f3, we have to notice the white queen on b4 being undefended. So after bishop g3, queen can take. So white is not allowed to go to e3 with the king.
Yes.
So that's why white moved to g1. And if black sees nothing more, then black can always play knight f3 back and knight h2 and be happy with a draw. But I don't think that's what black would be happy with. But we have a similar idea again with rook takes e3. That's one option to play. And again, if you recapture, I still take on e3 with the bishop and capture the queen on b4. And if you do not recapture, then I have an open file.
And it's an important lesson, really, in when pieces are on the same line as each other, whether it's bishops on the same diagonal or queens in the same rank here. If this bishop were out of the way, the queen on b4 would be under attack. Same thing with the queen on g4. So bishop takes knight on h2 check would be the best move if it were legal, because then you get to take this queen on b4. Not possible. And one thing that I'm thinking about is that if the queen stay on the board, isn't this black king in some serious trouble too? Like if this queen could get to c3 and work on the diagonal here, that would concern me. Though, Katerina, your move rook takes e3 seems to do some real damage more quickly.
By the way, I'm thinking about the idea after rook e3. What happens if we sacrifice our queen, guys? Like, just because bishop takes d5 check comes in at the end, does that lead to anything fun? I'm already getting a piece and a rook for it. So I've already gotten a piece and a rook, and I also get to take d5. But can you run with your king? Look at how both of my bishops are blocking your king from any square but f8. But is f8 sufficient?
I think it probably is. Like king f8, you have one check, rook f1 check. I go king to e7, I want to say.
And you're coming to the nice square d6, which is not only going to give you even more escape squares, but also just going to attack my bishop on c6.
Yeah.
I mean on d5, right?
I'm just running my king to safety because as soon as I get a free move, my queen's coming over to the king side, probably checkmating your king over there on h2. So it's a matter of timing.
Yeah. So I'm struggling here for white. So I'm like just looking for some tactical way to resolve my problems. Because if I can't do this, then what do? I mean, rook takes e3 just looks so strong. Because now knight f3 check is a very serious threat.
Yeah, and knight f3 check was played first, which means rook takes e3 is still possible in this move order. And maybe this move order is like kind of sneaky. Because if rook e3, pawn takes e3, it looks like your bishop can't move. But then you go knight h2 check and force the white king onto a dark square. So that's actually a really funny move order situation here. And maybe that's what black is going for. I hope that we see rook takes e3, not because I'm rooting for either player. I don't know either of these participants. But rook takes e3 is a really nice tactical shot that Katerina, you saw first.
I have a question, technical question, Robert. If you repeat your position 3 times, does chess.com immediately call that game a draw or not?
It does, yes.
Okay. So you cannot play that just to get some time. Okay. But I mean, this is a very interesting position, but I would like to go back to our game Carissa against Martha because these pawns are advancing.
Okay, let me...
A wise pawn. Well, those are 3 wise pawns, guys.
Now actually 4.
Oh boy. The 4 wise pawns. That's too many. Rook to b1 just played by white, looking to clip one of them, but not even, because we would probably just be able to take and then play c2 then. Queen c4 played, though, looking seriously to get them all 4 connected and passed, because queen takes a2 is now a possibility.
I have to be honest with you, too. This is one of the more painful positions I've seen. And white is, I'm going to put this in quotes, up a piece, but really what black is up is 3 pawns and way more space and about to promote all sorts of pawns here. No, this is very sad position to have from the white side. Yeah,
this is just looking over, and what a beautifully played game by Martha. Really good job. She had a tough struggle on the first round, but funny thing is, I noticed that sometimes when people have tough games in the first round of these events, they actually it's good because it gets them into like the playing zone and warms them up more than some of the players who got really easy pickings, and you can see that here for Martha.
And I liked in this game that it was kind of a positional sacrifice, right? We talk about tactics, like you take, check, and checkmate, or you win a piece. But here you sacrifice the knight for 3 pawns, and you just had to understand that your position is good, the pawns are going to be strong, and you decide to go for it. So I think that's also a good credit to Martha for recognizing this and sacrificing the knight.
Yeah, I'm just going back to that moment where the queen took the knight on b2, but it's 3 passed pawns, and that became much easier to play for her at the very least. Now she is winning. By the way, Charisse Woods won her game. We had tuned into that one earlier, and she ends up with this queen f3 check move, forcing the queens off the board. She has an extra bishop. She has a passed pawn. So that was an upset against Shreya Mangalam there. So Charisse is 1905 US chess rating, and Shreya is 2132. So a 200-point upset.
Yeah, that's right. Shreya of Illinois. So nice job to Charisse of Michigan, who's played on Team USA previously for some of our World Youth competitions. So nice to see her doing well in the National Girls Tournament of Champions as well.
Nice upset to add to your resume. Must feel good in this event, especially when you're early on and you're undefeated. So you still have a chance to play for first place. The Destiny, she controls her own fate. That's the word I'm looking for. Because if she plays her best chess, she can compete with even the very top-rated players in the field, no matter how difficult those challenges will be. And where to next?
I'm pitching Pillsbury Bind 101 because now it transposed to a rook endgame. White is still 2 pawns up, but is that easy win or is that not an easy win?
It looks, so I see what your point is. That if the king runs away too far for white, black has this rook b3 move. And you can't play rook b3 now because I can take it and my king is in the box. I'll just show that on the board. King comes back to d3 and my king is in this box to stop your passed pawn. But if the king, say, were somewhere else, like if I went g5, rook b1, king g4, then I would have rook to b3 because you can't take this rook as then the pawn gets to pass. That's black's only hope here is to play this rook b3 move at some point.
Yes, I was very excited to play rook h2 for black. But again, it was white's turn, and that is a problem because if the white king remained on f3 when I play rook h2, then it's a completely different story.
Certainly, because you're winning this pawn, and now you would only be down 1 pawn in this endgame with clear chances to hold. Unfortunately, for black, king e3 is played, so after your rook h2 move, there's king to d4.
So this should be probably an easy win for white because the king is active, the pawns are advanced, both a3 and h3 pawns are defended.
Yeah, I guess black can swing the rook from g2 to b2 and throw in rook g3 or rook b3, depending on where the white king goes. But then white can just play e5, f5, so pushing the pawns up. It's only a matter of time before you break free a passed pawn to win the game. So I think that this one should be relatively straightforward.
Oh, and let's take a look at Praveen's game because somehow the character of that one changed dramatically in the last few moves as Praveen found a really nice continuation.
Okay, so we last left off that a rook came to h8, d5 was played, trying to exchange some pieces, rook h3, take on d2, take here, and now, after knight f5, rook came to d7, trying to threaten some kind of draws here with knight e7 check, knight's back to f5, and that's why Praveen went rook f2 and stole this knight on f5 for a second passed pawn on the king side. And those pawns roll real quick, don't they?
Yeah, that's the problem with that king on a3. The pawns now, the funny thing is these double pawns actually make it take forever for us to create a passed pawn. I'm not sure I ever saw that exact configuration before. It takes way too long. And meanwhile, black is just marching up the board.
Yeah, you're going to play g2, king g4, f5, f4, f3, f2. That's really your plan for black. And as you're pointing out, white's pawns take a little bit more time. And so Praveen will look like he will get a queen first.
Yeah, nice demonstration by Praveen, who looks like he's going to 2-0 along with several players already, but notably Nicholas Cheka and Robert Chinalenko, both with 2-0 to start off as well.
Although actually Robert's still playing. Oh my gosh, we should look at that game real quick because it's one of the saddest pieces I've seen in a long time. If we just flip the board here, there is a rook on a2 that cannot move.
Wow.
Well, which one's sadder, the rook on a2 or the queen on a1?
The rook on a2 because it's such a sad piece that I don't have to take it for like the next bunch of moves. I can continue improving my position. It can't go anywhere.
Shailetenko. I'm sorry, I keep abbreviating his name. But yes, a wonderful player, and it looks like he's about to go to 2-0 in style. Look at those bishops go. He's just parked his bishop on d4 with check.
And I think that was a very strong move because now if white decides to play bishop f2 to trade the bishops, then I can trade them. I mean, I can play maybe even bishop e3, but even if I trade them, now you really can never move your queen if you recapture with knight because the rook would be lost.
Love bishop e3 though. Oh my god, that's such a pretty move. Just like a collinear move where you just move the bishop on the same line that it's on, but it's devastating. Love those type of little moves.
I always learned that when I was younger. When Miran, my coach, he would say, people miss, they move right before the capture. So if rooks are on the same line, instead of rook takes on e8, you stop on e7. And these kind of moves are so beautiful to play bishop to e3 rather than take. You can play d4 next to just cement that bishop in there. And the knight, of course, in d3. I mean, everything is a problem for white, but stopping one move short of the capture is really a nice type of move.
Did he have a name for that move, or was it just, a phrase like right before the capture?
I don't remember. I don't recall him ever using a specific term for it, but we can create one right now.
Well, I mentioned collinear. That's one that John Nunn, I think, coined. But it's a little stodgy, the word. Like it's kind of like it sounds very technical. So maybe we could come up with something more fun, more sticky. Because the thing about language is that if you have a word that describes something well, it ultimately becomes easier to see because then it's like stuck there in your brain. So it's not just for fun, stunt double knights, things like that. It helps. It helps you with your game.
Maybe a shortstop because you stop short. I don't know. I'm just coming up with things.
I like that. And I bet your chat will come up with some good ones too. And by the way, psychologically, I think that's brilliant. I know Miran Shah must have been a great coach. Yeah, he worked with you. Didn't he work with Fabi for a little bit too? So yeah, he's got a nice resume. He's got a very nice resume. And I like, because psychologically, we're so obsessed with captures because that's how you become a great player, as Katerina taught our girls club room. You look at all the forcing moves. So once you've gone far enough to capture a piece, sometimes it's hard to look at the move right before it.
This is such a sad position for white. I mean, there's nothing to do. This is just totally lost.
So should we move on to another game? I see one out of the corner of my eye here that is between VB Chess, who we saw in the first game, and this king went to d6. And, I mean, white is down in exchange, but has a really active king here. And so I'm wondering, with black only having 48 seconds left, who has the better chances, the extra material or the extra time?
That's a very good question. But I usually go for material.
Yeah, she has a lot of faith. I mean, there is an increment, right?
There is 10-second increment, although it's a tricky position. King d7 coming after this rook.
Okay, I'm going. Now I'm getting a chance to look at the position more. I'm going for white because I've got the extra time, but I also have the bishops and the king, the power king.
This is a very powerful king indeed, and this is also VB Chess is Quinn Hudson, who beats Carissa Yip in the first game, and black is under 20 seconds. This is Logan Wu with the black pieces here, and 22 seconds. He made them. Bishop takes c5. I mean, aren't white's moves kind of easy in the near future?
By the way, guys, bang, bang, nice checkmate by Robert to finish it off. He just played the move rook e2 check, talking about a nice little, I guess it's not really a short stop move, but it is a really pretty move. If you want to just backtrack to that. Yeah, and he did that. And now his idea is that queen takes g2, forcing the king either to e1 or to d3. But either way, he's king e1 simple, rook e8 check is mating, right? What about the other one though? Oh, I guess there's still knight e4.
I mean, you can do, if you can do anything, you just take on
queen
e4
f3, yeah. But what about the other move, the king d3 move? What happened there?
I think that was more forcing. King to d3, there was queen f3 check, and then king d4 or king d2, it doesn't matter where, queen e3 was made.
Oh, that's nice. That is a nice one. I like that geometry there. Oh, wow. Well, great finish. A way to finish it in style by Robert.
Oh, rook takes e4. He didn't even take the knight with the pawn. He took with the rook and went f3. You cannot stop queen e2. The queen on a1, the rook on a2 are completely useless. And rook d2 is met by queen g1 checkmate. That is as stylish as it gets.
What a beautiful finale. You got to love that. White is actually up an exchange and a rook. But it's actually a great one to show students, isn't it? Because look at how the material matters not at all because the material is cornered with no impact in the position. And there it is. He wins the game.
Brutal finish indeed, but a nice victory for Robert there as he moves to 2-0. And I mean, I want to take us back to that game we were just looking at with 20 seconds left for Black in this endgame here. I just don't know who I should assume has the better position. There's a king on d7, which actually can be checkmated. Right? Like if White moves his bishop away from c5, there's some kind of like rook a7, rook f8, checkmate that you would see with two rooks against a bare king. So I wouldn't say the king on d7 is just an aggressive, awesome piece. It also can fall victim to a swift mating attack.
I think rook f6 is a really strong move. I mean, when we go back, maybe Black thought about capturing the pawn on h4, but suddenly thinking that we can trap the king in our camp on our side on d7, I think rook f6 is a very silent and very powerful move. And now maybe threatening bishop f5. Yeah.
The king is going on a walk on the wild side here, and it seems to be safe for the time being. And I do believe that you can get away with playing b4 and trying to push this pawn up the board. It does protect your bishop on c5 in case of any kind of crazy checks. So I think b4 makes sense, but I'm with you, Katerina. The rook f6, a nice retreating move instead of being sort of greedy and going after the h4 pawn.
And if you go b4 and I just move rook b8 with the same idea, just going rook b7 and push the king even more, what do you think you will do? Because I do want you to move the bishop from c4, but you can even go to a6 to prevent the rook b7 because my rook from f6 is going to take you.
Yeah, I mean, rook b8, rook b7, that looks as a mating net. This bishop on e4 is really strong here, and the problem for White is this rook on c3 is not where it needs to be. You need to activate this rook somehow. Like if this rook were on d4 or even on d6 to trade rooks off, then I'd feel more confident about White's position. But because Black's rooks and the bishop on e4 seem better coordinated, it feels like the White king is in danger, and I'm not sure if the b pawn.
In that case, Robert, what about rook c1 and rook f1? I mean, you said let's trade the rook, so maybe that can be a good idea for White.
But you also told me bishop f5 check is coming, and I got scared about that.
Yeah. I mean, imagine White having 30 seconds here. That would be a different story.
Well, speaking of being in time pressure, we are going to see, I think, a few of these remaining games get into some very exciting time scrambles. So before we get to that, we're going to take a quick break and finish out the exciting round 2 of the Denker Tournament of High School Champions and the Haring Tournament of Girls State Champions.
And we return here with the conclusion of the second round of the Denker and the Haring. And there is about 7 games remaining. So, Jennifer, Katerina, if you find any games that are catching your eye down the stretch here, please let me know. I have the game between Pillsbury Bind and Nanjivere. It looks like finally, at long last, White is going to secure the victory as she is up 2 pawns, and the king can come to f4, the rook can come to h8 and try to gather up this pawn h4, and it seems to make her life much easier.
This looks like a very nice endgame for White. I do like maybe playing rook a7 to kind of force the king to go to the back rank also, or going up and losing the pawn on f7.
And she plays rook a7, so clearly, Katerina, she's a player that takes from you here. Throwing in the check, forcing the king back. Oh,
okay, guys. And the game that intrigues me the most right now is that same one from earlier, VB Chess 21 versus LWU Denker. The one with the bishops versus the exchange and the king on d8. Like, what a weird position. And only 15 seconds left for the bishops.
And this is.
Oh wait, no, I got that backwards, didn't I? 15 seconds left for the rook.
Wait, this pawn e3. It was on e3 before, right? Like, it's the last 2 moves were e4, attacking the bishop on f3, and the bishop came d1, e5, and clearly White's plan is to go e6, e7, e8. Just don't do that yet, because e6, rook a8 is exactly the checkmate we were talking about, where the king is cut off. So do not play e6. Instead, bishop d6 was played, and after rook to a8, probably rook c8, offering an exchange of rooks. Uh-oh. That e-pawn's running way too quickly.
Yeah, this looks great for White. And this is Logan Wu against Quinn Hudson. But 2000 versus 2200. So we're already seeing a lot of tight battles in these tournaments.
And Quinn is the one who beat Carissa in the first round. So this would be a great start to his day if he is able to secure this point.
But Black still have some chances with playing bishop a4, right? A kind of taking control of their diagonal and then potentially playing like rook d7 and some discovered attacks.
Interesting idea. So you're saying that if I put my pawn on e7, then you'd have rook d7 check. That's a nice line.
And actually, that's really frustrating to deal with because bishop a4 has just been played. And Katerina's point, e7 would be a bad move, rook d7. You have to take, I take, your king has to go to e8, only legal move. And I can just take your bishop on.
But I do have king f7, but then with a check, I meet your check with a check. But then
Jennifer, you inspired me. King g8. I'm going to trap your king in here.
Nice. I like that. That's a move.
My rook is just trying to move, and you try to attack my bishop. I'll go rook a7 check and win your rook. So,
wow, this is beautiful.
What a
gorgeous line, gorgeous. But none of that for White. They started actually with bishop to cf7, blocking that brilliant idea. And Black felt compelled to play g6. But I don't know. I don't think this is going to work out.
So the king is trying to run quickly, I guess, to g7 into f6. And White has 2 pawns and a dark square bishop for the rook. The problem is this king on d8 really doesn't feel that safe anymore. I mean, I said this a while ago that the king can get checkmated, and it's not going to get checkmated just yet, but there are some ideas with this. Oh my gosh, rook a6. Okay, I was going to say maybe I'll have to wait till the game is over, but if rook a6 and you played e7, don't I still have this rook d6 check and it's another checkmate really fancily?
Oh, nice. Beautiful. But instead, it looks like White might be doing the checkmating here. What's going on? Bishop e5 check, forcing the king back to g8. Oh my gosh. And if I could somehow, get my king, I said earlier, Katerina, you weren't here. I said that checkmating with the king is the sweetest checkmate. And we're so close here. If we could play king e7 or king c7 or king d7, it would actually be mate. But unfortunately we can't. The rook is blocking all those squares. Oh, so what do we do instead?
But the bishops are so strong. I mean, bishop on e5 and g6, those are really strong bishops. So I'm not sure if Black is playing here for a win now.
What about bishop? Okay, so bishop f7 check doesn't make that much progress. You wouldn't play king f8 walking into bishop d6. with a fork, you would just stick your king back to h7, right?
I'd probably just take the bishop, right, and enter an obstacle at bishop
Yeah,
position.
yeah, never mind. Good point. Just take, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so
But
what's it doing here for white?
Yeah, for white, I'm not sure, but for black, I can just play rook b6 now, right? That's a very straightforward idea to go and capture the pawn.
Right. It is white's move, though. So white has to come up with something good here. And we just came from c7, right? So if we play bishop c7, threatening king e7 check, you have, what? Rook. What would you do then if I just put my bishop back on c7?
You have rook d4 check, I guess, because if king e7 check, then a king g7, and your bishop is pinned, so you don't get your bishop e5 stuff.
I know, right? It's this king is always in the wrong spot here, it seems. What a fascinating endgame, though. Like, I'm just like spellbound by this, actually. It to me, like at first, it feels like I'm looking at this and I'm like, there's got to be something for white. And then the more you look at it, it's black's defensive resources are so ample.
Okay, so I have a question, Robert. So what if bishop c7? Oh, okay, never mind. Let's look what happened. Rook c7. That's interesting.
So the first and biggest question is, if I trade rooks so I can avoid any kind of checkmating attack, is that bad for black? Doesn't look good, but it's probably manageable. In 10 seconds, 9 seconds, it's making me nervous here. Under 6. Oh gosh, please make a move. Okay, rook b8 check.
Okay, makes sense. Forcing me to play king e7 first, which blocks my own pawn.
Mm-hmm. And there are still weird mating nets, and I think he's going to take rook 8 played barely, just got that move off. And can I just take this rook and put my king on f6 and try to go e7, e8? It probably shouldn't be winning. It just feels hard to play when black has 14 seconds left.
Yeah, and of course, if we want to, at this point, we could play bishop f7 and bishop g6 and get that draw if white wanted. But with that 9-minute time advantage, I'm not sure they're going to go for that.
I've never seen a position quite like this before.
Yeah, and it's actually gotten less crazy. Like the king on d8 is just so rare.
You're promoting your king, it doesn't happen very often.
I do like starting with bishop f7 check, just to force the king to go back and have a little more kind of freedom with my pawn on e7. So maybe bishop f7, king h7, king f6. That looks nice, I think.
Okay, so you want your king to get to f6 and the bishop on f6. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, right? And a draw was just offered by Logan Wu with the black pieces. And if I am I'm not accepting that. No way. You have 14 seconds. There's still plenty of life left here. And I don't really see a way for white to lose this game. So I would toss that draw for out the window and just continue playing.
Agreed. And that's the same thing that Accelerated Dragon says in your Twitch chat. He says, this is such a fascinating position, but I think it's going to come down to white having much more thinking time. Pete at US Chess, who is responsible for helping put all these events together on behalf of US Chess, also thinks that this game is insane and very exciting. I don't think he committed to who he thought was going to win, though. I still think a draw is by far the most likely result at this point. I wouldn't have said that like 5 moves ago, but now I just think that there's a very high chance. First of all, the VB Chess, I'd say there's a decent chance that VB Chess thinks here for a little bit and actually does play bishop f7 and bishop g6. But even if not, it seems like we might get something like that further down the line.
White is in great position. I mean, white has 7 minutes, 40 seconds to think and really kind of recognize which patterns work the best. And then, spending maybe 3-4 minutes even here, then he can have a perfect understanding of the position. And black still has those 14 seconds and will have to play very fast. So sometimes I think it's good to kind of throw off your opponent by spending a lot of time and getting a better understanding instead of trying to kind of blitz all the games, all the moves, and try to flag your opponent.
Yeah,
very good point.
you're also trying to come up with the right formation. You're not just saying, oh, what am I going to do at this particular moment? But what is the trickiest configuration of pieces? Should my king be on f6 with my bishop on f7? Or should my king be on f6 with my bishop on g6? Am I going to play e7 as quickly as possible? Or do I want to save that move for a later time? Do I want to put my bishop on f4 to attack this h6 pawn? Or does my bishop on e5 the right square? So you're just trying to figure out exactly where your pieces belong. And when you have 6.5 plus minutes, your opponent's 14 seconds, with a position where there's minimal, really no risk whatsoever for white, I think it's very wise to use the clock here.
Yeah,
Actually,
really.
that's a very good idea. I like the idea of maybe trading the rooks and then playing king f6 and then just going after the pawn on h6.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, and this is by far the most interesting game. It looks like the others are either have a clear winner or a clear draw. So we can keep our eyes peeled on this. And the thing about it is you see really good blitz players do this sometimes also, Katarina, because they realize that it's not just about finding the best move. It's about increasing your chances of swindling your opponent. And if you can like think ahead while they're nervous and then blitz out maybe 2 or 3 moves after this move, that is highly profitable. That's the kind of thing I feel like I see Hikaru do a lot. He's got his opponent in time pressure. He thinks for 5 minutes and then he thinks for 0 seconds for the next 5 moves. And how do you deal with that? What do you do? Usually you lose.
Exactly. So, if you're playing a card, that usually is the case no matter what, but especially in situations like this where you spend a bunch of time for the first move, that way you can rip off a sequence that is hard to meet. And yeah, I am looking at some of these other games as well. I think that in this one here that I'm pulling up between Pillsbury and Nanji Bear, it feels like white has really made a mess of this, unfortunately, because white is up 2 pawns. Though after this rook e3 check, the king has nowhere good to go. As your king goes up to f4, over goes my rook to a3 to win this a4 pawn. And if your king goes back, my rook still goes to e4, and your pawn on g4 is pinned, and I'm going to take the a4 pawn. So it's going to be rook and 2 pawns against rook and 1 pawn. Still winning chances for white, absolutely. But this isn't what she wanted. She had better chances earlier.
Yeah, I wonder what happened. Can you maybe move back a couple of the moves and see what happened in this position?
So she went rook a8 check and pushed her a pawn, and then brought the rook around over to h8. The king came back to f3, h2, and rook h4 was played here. Okay, I think that's all right. And then king g2, rook e1, and king that's the move. That's the move that was a problem. King takes h2. You had to take with the rook on h2, because after rook takes e5, then you have king to f3, and you bring your rook behind your passed a pawn.
Yeah, that sounds like a much better formation to have the rook behind the passed pawn, and then just we can continue playing on the king side.
Yeah, because after the game, after king h2, rook takes e5, unfortunately, you can't push g5 because the f5 pawn needs defense, and rook e4 is the next move, or as in the game after king g3, rook e3 check, forcing the king up so that you can win this pawn a4. That's a very important pawn, an outside pass pawn, and it seems like black should be able to hold with proper play, but that's the key word, is proper play, because not much time left, easy to go wrong.
Yes, and white has still extra pawns, so white will be pushing as long as possible and just wait for that one mistake from black and then having better position. So I think we can expect many moves here.
Yes, let's go back to the game with VB Chess, Quinn Hudson's game, because the position has changed. And whoa, okay, this bishop went to b3. The rooks were traded, and I guess the point is after e7, there's just bishop to a4, holding down the square.
And then maybe bishop d8, but then you're still not threatening the queen because you can just take, and then take the bishop on d8.
Yeah, you're cutting it off, but you can't, as you're pointing out, you can't queen. And there's also just a rook a6 check maybe. And there's even possibility of rook takes g6 in some variations that could hold a draw, but I wouldn't sacrifice unless I was absolutely positive of that situation. So bishop f7 check, king to h7, and bishop f4. Under 20 seconds now for black. What do you do here? This pawn h6 is the target.
And He's played rook a6, pinning the pawn on e6.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now bishop g6 or still king g8, no problem. Nice move, rook a6. I like that defensive move.
Oh, with so little time on the clock, I honestly would try to make a
King
wave like bishop
king
e3.
f5.
Some kind of move like that, bishop e3 or king f5. Just saying, make a move. I'm challenging you here because white can always go bishop g6, bishop o7, or something like that. Bishop g6 wins the h6 pawn. I'm just thinking that what does black do after bishop e3? Is it as simple as a bishop c4, bishop a2? Just keep moving your bishop back and forth?
We can try to play with the idea of checkmating with the pair of bishops. So maybe playing bishop e3, bishop c5, bishop f8.
Oh.
I mean,
Meeting with a pair of bishops by sticking a bishop on f8. It's interesting, actually. Pete in the chat recommend putting a king on f8. But either way, the idea is to try to like corner that king on h7 while the rook is defending against the e pawn push.
And the problem is if you bring the king to f8, there's always rook to a8, checking
Yeah.
the king off there.
But what about Katarina's idea of sticking the bishop on f8? But we can start with your move, Robert, bishop e3, right?
Yeah. I'm just trying to figure out what next. Like let's say I just put the bishop on it. I'm going to let it happen. So I'm going to go here. You'll go here. I'll go back. Your bishop's on f8. So what's next?
so now it's your turn. So the question is, where are you going to have your rook?
I'll just put bishop a2.
Ooh, okay. So now I just want to start moving with my king because your king cannot move. So I will play, let's say, king e5.
Oh, and they agreed on a draw. So we can keep analyzing as they made bishop g6 check and agreed on a draw. But I just not sure I see. I'm not sure I even see once we get to this position. So where's your king going from f6?
That's a good. So you want to. So king e5.
Okay, so I go bishop b3.
And now I give check on g6 and push my pawn.
And then I go here. Yeah, I think it's
taking on h6 doesn't solve anything, I guess.
It's the same problem as before, right? The bishop was on d8 and the rook was on a8, but you can't queen when your bishop's hanging over on f8, right?
Yeah, it looks nice, but black is doing fine. So maybe black is safe there.
Somehow, some way, the position was, I guess, just level. I mean, after all of that, it looked like good chances for both sides at different points, and a draw seems to be a pretty fair result.
Fascinating struggle, though, as it looks like Sydney Kong is marching her way to a win in her game against Blue Queen. And Sydney Kong is SYDK. She's from Tennessee, and she did just indeed win. She's also a frequent participant at our Girls Club room. So shout out to Sydney. And I think she was actually paired slightly up. She was playing against Anne-Marie Valea,
Blue
2100.
Blue Queen was white. So
Blue Queen was white. I got it mixed up.
No, that's my fault. I had the board flipped, so it looked like it was coming from the other direction, but then I flipped it to the right side. So Blue Queen was white. Pawn's going this way. So that's on me. I take the fault for that one, but it looks like Anne-Marie did win the game.
Anne-Marie Valea, she is part of the chess family, and now she soars to 2-0 in the longest game of the round. Wait, is the Pillsbury?
It's still going, and we have a very instructive end game here, so I have to bring it back up.
Okay.
Look what we have here. Look what we have in this position. It is winning for white, and you need to know how to build the bridge. Right? We have the king on f7, the king cut off on d7. We have our passed pawn. So what white is going to do is bring this rook back, and okay, here we go. Let's see the players play it out, because they should know their endgame technique. And the start is there. Wherever the rook goes, you want to check the king off the d file.
You seem so excited to get a theoretical endgame. You're very passionate about endgames, Robert. Where did that come from?
I love endgames. I think they've been maligned for no reason throughout time, especially by kids. Oh, they're so boring, the endgame. I don't want to sacrifice my queen and this and that. No, endgames are awesome, and they're incredibly instructive, and people often think that it's just a draw, or it's completely equal, or in these kind of terms. But there are always these little nuances that can change the trajectory of a game. And he doesn't write this column anymore, but my good friend Danya Naroditsky, he had such an excellent endgame column in Chess Life magazine, showing instructive endgame after instructive endgame with little complexities and nuances here and there, and how you can win these positions that look like they should be level. And so many players that passed Capablanca, and was able, one of my favorite players, and actually just a win on the clock in a winning position. So I was talking for so long that the game concluded.
Very nice. Well done. As we have closed out round 2, and let's review the schedule, as we've got one more round tonight. That's going to be at 7 o'clock Eastern time, 4 o'clock Pacific, and Robert and I will be back to call that. So we'd really like to give a huge thank you to Women's Grandmaster Katerina Nemkova, who is going to be leaving us, but it was so fantastic to have you. And I think it's already like midnight in Prague. So thanks for staying with us so late for you.
Thank you so much for having me. I mean, it's so exciting to look at some chess, even if I'm not playing. It's fun to see players, playing and competing in such an important tournament.
It certainly is. And we're very appreciative that you've joined us, me yesterday for the Blitz, and today for these Denker and Haring events. Do you have any kind of final thoughts on what you've seen today from the action, and maybe some pointers you can give some of these young talents?
What I'm noticing is that, yes, tactics is extremely important. So let's work on tactics, let's improve that. And I think it can greatly help in chess understanding. But we are also seeing that it's important to have some positional understanding. Like we saw the brilliant idea of Martha, like sacrificing the knight for 3 pawns. We saw some, I don't know, the other players, but like rook endgames technique. So positional play is also important. So it's worth it to look at some books, or have an opponent and just decide to play. Let's play this endgame and learn how to win that endgame. So I think that's also interesting for chess players to think about it. But I'm just happy to be back in chess and enjoy some games.
Well, we love to have you here, Katerina. And thanks everybody who's subbing to Robert's channel as well. As you do so much for chess. And even though I know a lot of the times you stream on the chess.com channel, it is nice for people to support this. You can also donate to US Chess. And yeah, keep those subs coming. In fact, you're very close to 100. So I'm sure they're going to need to make that round number soon, Robert.
Well, I appreciate you, Shannon. And of course, Jen has her channel, Jen Shahadi, here on Twitch. And you, I know, stream poker as well as chess. And you're such a great ambassador for both games. And so, if you want to have some fun and follow Jennifer, it's only right that I shout out your channel. Katerina, got to get you streaming soon.
Yes, maybe it's time for it.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to take our break. We will be back at 7 p.m. Eastern time for the 3rd round of the Denker and the Haring tournaments. You will not want to miss the action.
Can't wait for that. See you guys soon.
Bye.